Chapter 793. Compared to the beast's ferocious aura, Xiang was not only small in size, he did not give off a powerful aura either. Xiang and the fire beast, one was outwardly radiant while the other was inwardly restrained. Both gave off a strange vibe. This scene was not balanced. However, everyone had an answer that they did not want to admit. While the people far away were not affected, Xian could sense that Xiang's raised hand seemed to be restraining a powerful force within a limited area. This was why Xiang gave off a reserved aura. A direct clash. When the raised hand collided with the flaming beast, an indescribable aura filled the area. The bone-reading beast's flames were blocked, as if it had hit an invisible wall. It could not advance any further. Boom! The collision of power brought about a powerful tremor, causing the dark void to distort. A trace of frenzied aura recklessly exploded, as if it wanted to tear apart everything it came into contact with. Everything that stood in its way was shattered into pieces. In the dark void, it was as if a violent hurricane had suddenly appeared. At that moment, it made people feel as if there was an unparalleled force flowing in all directions. On the battlefield, the bone-reading beast's flaming body was not only unable to advance any further in front of the hand, it began to crack from head to toe, all the way to its elongated tail. Not a single part of it was spared. A bright white appeared as the flaming beast's body cracked open. The next moment it was caught by the hand. The 5 fingers clenched tightly. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. That sound did not come from the hand, but from the bright white light in the hand. The light disappeared, and with the sound of bones breaking, the massive flame behemoth seemed to explode from the inside. Countless sparks splashed out, and the originally powerful energy fluctuations became even more violent. It was as if the entire void was shaking and shaking. Gusts of wind swept out from the battlefield along with the splashing sparks. The orange-red sparks were like brilliant fireworks, flying from the battlefield to the farthest reaches of the void. The resulting storm seemed to blow people away. Blowing people away? Yes, the silhouettes of many of the figures were blurred by the tremor. The flames that made up the figures seemed to be dispersing. Even the 3 elders of the Yi family were blurred for a moment. Even Xian, who was far away from the battlefield, was affected. It was as if his entire body was locked in a cage, and he was being violently shaken. His head was dizzy, and his consciousness was momentarily scattered. It was uncomfortable, but Xian endured it and quickly gathered his consciousness again. However, although it was uncomfortable and he was still affected, Xian also gained something. The scene just now gave Xian a great deal of inspiration. Every trace of energy fluctuation had its reason for existence, and Xian was able to deduce its origin and cause from these details. Xian realized that the clash between Yituan's bone-reading beast and Xiang was not a battle intent brought about by another form of life, but a push from the consciousness of the exorcist. A push from the consciousness, Xian felt as if he had found a way to leave this place. However, he did not want to leave just yet. It was rare for him to meet the legendary Xiang of the Yi family, and he was unwilling to leave just like that. He had yet to see how powerful Xiang was. Furthermore, observing Xiang's abilities was his goal in coming here. Let's wait and see, Xian thought. The scattered sparks seemed to be scorching hot, but the Yi family felt a chill run down their spines. This was just a test from Yituan, but it was not a casual attack. If it had been used on anyone else, it would have been a fatal blow. However, against Xiang, who was walking slowly towards him, it was reduced to nothingness in a single blow. What little confidence they had left fell again, and fear rose in their hearts. The rumors were true. Xiang was indeed powerful. This was only a probing exchange. His true strength was still unknown for the time being. For the Yi family, the unknown was the scariest. Yituan shuddered in disbelief. Even though Xian could not see his face in his current form, he could guess his expression. The white light was the fire beast's source of power, a bone that gathered all the life energy in the beast's bones. Just now, The fire beast's source of power had been destroyed. It could no longer exist. At the same time, in the Yi family's mansion in the royal city, a bone in front of Yi Tuan shattered with a crack. Amidst the oppressive silence, the cracking sound came abruptly. Everyone standing in the surroundings looked over. A middle-aged man nearby stared at the broken bone in front of Yi Tuan, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. "It's broken! It's broken!" A large bead of sweat dripped from the man's forehead. Broken meant the bone was useless. In the Yi family's words, the bone was truly dead, with no life energy left in it. It wasn't that he hadn't expected this situation, but it came too quickly, so quickly that the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. Each bone Yi Tuan used came from a powerful, fearsome beast. The fact that it could survive to this day meant that it came from a giant beast that looked like a tiger or a leopard. It was a ferocious, fearsome beast when it was alive. Its bones had great vitality, but now this bone had shattered, and it shattered very cleanly. It shattered into pieces almost instantly, not giving anyone time to react at all. How long had it been? This was not good. This was the same thought that came to everyone's mind. In the endless darkness of the void, Yi Xiang, who had paused for a moment because of the fire beast, looked at Yi Tuan and the rest, speaking in a rare moment. "Your generation is not good." His tone was flat and emotionless, and it was impossible to tell his age. It was even more impossible to guess what the speaker was feeling at this moment. If it had been anyone else, they would have exuded an indescribable cold arrogance. But Yi Xiang was different. He exuded an eerie calmness, though no one knew how much madness was hidden under that calmness. Yi Xiang's rare words were the first he had spoken since he appeared. In layman's terms, he was calling Yi Tuan and the rest a bunch of trash. This was a resounding slap to the faces of all the Yi family members, including Yi Tuan and the other two old men. Yi Tuan was infuriated to be rejected by a senior of the family, and a traitor of the Yi family at that. But he had to admit that the test had surprised them. Yi Xiang turned to look in Xiao Xian's direction. He could not see Yi Xiang's face, but Xiao Xian could feel his eyes boring into his brain and heart. At this moment, he felt like he was being seen through by Yi Xiang's eyes. "Xiao Xian, why are you looking at me like that?" Xiao Xian was prepared to retreat at the first sign of trouble. This was the Yi family's home ground. He would not gain any advantage here. He would not fight the Yi family directly, much less the unknown Yi Xiang. If he did, Xiao Xian would have to retreat. He was not a member of the Yi family anyway. He did not have the family's pride to fight Yi Xiang. Fortunately, Yi Xiang did not continue to stare at Xiao Xian. After a brief glance, he turned to Yi Tuan and the rest and started walking again. His speed and distance were exactly the same as before, as if measured by a machine. Xiao Xian had a feeling that Yi Xiang was like a ticking time bomb with a dial. His legs were the needle on the dial. When the needle reached the end, it would cause an even more destructive storm. Chapter 794. Xiao Xian watched as Yi Xiang lifted the hand that had smacked the bone-reading beast away, then drew an arc in front of him. In the next instant, the arc of fire on the Yi family totem under Yi Xiang's feet expanded abruptly, spreading to both sides like a raging river. The flames on the fire path rose higher, no longer restrained. Like a gathering of 10,000 beasts, they were about to charge forward. Yi Xiang's totem had been the size of a normal totem, but now it had expanded to the size of a few hundred people. It was about the same size as Yi Tuan's totem, perhaps even larger. Yi Tuan felt even more pressure by the fact that one person could do this. If possible, he did not want to fight such a person, but he had no choice. Xiao Xian's brows twitched. Even from afar, he could clearly feel the pressure spreading from the other side. Although his body was not here, Xiao Xian felt his hair stand on end, as if a cold current was running through his body. This was not going to work. Yi Tuan's probing earlier had affected Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian would not be able to avoid an even bigger storm. The next clash between the two sides would be a real battle of strength. Strong against strong, tough against tough. If Xiao Xian continued to stay here, he would become cannon fodder. It was not safe. It was too dangerous. Was it worth the risk to stay? After some thought, Xiao Xian decided to leave. Just now, when the two sides collided for the first time, he had figured out a way to leave. He planned to give it a try. It would be best if he could leave, but if he couldn't, he would retreat a little further and then be prepared to welcome the impact of the storm. This was a form that surpassed his consciousness. It was similar to when he controlled the flame giant. Xiaoxian thought as he observed himself. As if parting a cloud, Xiaoxian saw a white dot. Xiaoxian suddenly thought of Yituan's bone-reading beast. Like the bone-reading beast, the white dot was the core of Xiaoxian's existence. It was similar to asterisk, 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 but not limited to asterisk, 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 asterisk. It also had powerful life force like a soul. At this moment, there were many more flames wrapped around the bright white. What Xiaoxian needed to do now was to remove all the flames that were wrapped around the bright white flame. Using only his consciousness, he could use the power available in this state. Although it looked like he had left his body, he could still use many powers, such as totemic power and another power in Xiaoxian's body. What Xiaoxian was using now was a power that was not from the Yinjiao fire seed. A thin white line of fire appeared around the white flame. Under the control of Xiaoxian's consciousness, it circled around the white flame. Every time it circled around the white flame, a part of the flame would be taken away. One circle, two circles. At first, the white line of fire slowly circled around, but later, it skillfully sped up to form a whirlpool, enveloping the bright white and red flames. Bit by bit, the white flames were taken away by the white line of fire. The white flames also gradually became thicker, and the surroundings were covered by the red flames. This was only happening in his sea of consciousness. In this dark void, the human-shaped flame on Xiaoxian's body decreased from bottom to top at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if it was disintegrating on its own according to a specific pattern. Yixiang, who was about to attack Yituan, paused, turning to look at Xiaoxian. Yituan saw Yixiang's reaction and glanced over as well, only to see half of the figure disappearing. There was a person standing there. Of course people would notice. Although Yituan focused all his attention on Yixiang, many people from the Yi family were also watching Xiaoxian. Their target this time was not Xiaoxian, but they would not trust a tribesman, especially one with old grudges. Of course they had to be cautious. The moment Xiaoxian started moving, the guards noticed that Xiaoxian was about to leave. However, they were more concerned about Yixiang and pretended not to see Xiaoxian. After all, Xiaoxian was about to leave. They did not expect Xiaoxian's disappearance to attract Yixiang's attention. Yixiang even stopped in his tracks. When Xiaoxian completely disappeared, Yituan sensed carefully, but could not sense Xiaoxian's presence. Right now, there was only the Yi family's fire seed's aura in the air, nothing else. They had wondered if Xiaoxian was the unforeseen accident, but now it seemed that was not the case. Yituan did not know whether to sigh in relief or disappointment. His emotions were complicated. Xiaoxian from the Yinjiao tribe did not have the Yi family's bloodline, and his fire seed's flame was different from theirs. However, Yituan's first impression of him was not out of place, just strange. But now was not the time to think about it. Questions could be left for later. Perhaps the kid was worried about being caught in the crossfire and ran away. What happened just now must have scared him. Many people from the Yi family thought so. Calm down, Yituan shouted. This was to distract them from paying attention to anything else. After Yituan's reprimand, the people guarding the formation calmed down. It was good that the tribesmen had left. They did not have to worry about him. They did not have to worry about an outsider becoming an unexpected factor in this battle, nor did they have to worry about Xiaoxian appearing again. Did he think he could come and go as he pleased? Most of them would make ample preparations before entering this place. After all, it required a lot of energy, and it was easy for the mind to get tired. Although it was easier to exit than when they entered, it was not that easy. Only a small portion of the Yi family could enter this place. It was already a surprise that a tribesman could make it here. Leaving safely could only be considered lucky. The Yi family no longer thought about Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian's appearance and departure was like a pebble thrown into a vast lake. It only caused small ripples, not waves. On the other side, when Xiao Xian opened his eyes, he felt dizzy for a moment. His vision darkened, and his brain was very tired. It took him a while to recover. He looked around him. Cha-Cha was perched on a nearby cliff, one paw pressing down on a snake as thick as an adult's thigh. It was pecking at its food. This kind of snake was not considered big in this forest, but in this area, it was already a rare big snake. After all, there were very few beasts living in this mountain range. Noticing that Xiao Xian was awake, Cha-Cha tossed a half-dead snake in front of Xiao Xian and hissed twice. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired." Xiao Xian patted Cha-Cha's bird head. He got up and slowly walked 2 steps. His feet stepped on the firm ground, and he felt the strong support of the ground. This place was completely different from the void. Xiao Xian looked at Yizong and Ichi. He saw that they were still sitting in the same position as before. However, the jade stones on the square plates in front of them had changed positions. The biggest difference was the Yi family totem, where Yizong and Ichi were sitting. Compared to before, the arc of fire in the totem was bigger and brighter. The flames were also taller. Naturally, the pressure it gave off was greater. The slaves guarding near the 2 of them were also further away. Yizong and Ichi were among the people guarding the Yi family. Xiao Xian did not find it strange that such a change would occur under the influence of 100 people. Xiao Xian did not look at the 2 of them. He felt that he had used up too much energy. He went hunting with Cha-Cha in the distance to find food. After eating and drinking, he even slept for a long time. His fatigue had completely disappeared. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and sat down again. He took out a straw rope and tried to enter the void using the 8-rope knot method. With his previous success, this time, Xiao Xian only wasted 3 straw ropes. The dark void appeared again. With his previous experience, Xiao Xian quickly steadied himself and suppressed the discomfort. Xiao Xian had been thinking that he had already left to eat and sleep. By the time he returned, the 2 sides should be almost done fighting, right? But when Xiao Xian looked over, Yixiang and Yituan did not look much different from when he left. The 2 sides, who had just calmed down and prepared for battle, realized that the person who had just left had reappeared. Yituan was about to throw out a bone divination when he froze. Yixiang, Yituan, the Yi family, his aura was different from the Yi families, so the Yi family recognized him immediately. Why was he here again? How is this possible? The first time was a coincidence, a stroke of luck. What about the second time? They thought it was a stroke of luck to be able to enter this place and leave safely, that tribesmen will be able to brag about it. Who knew he would appear again? And this time, Xiao Xian's figure was more solid, not as blurry as the first time. In fact, he looked similar to many of the Yi family guards. They would not believe that Xiao Xian did not know how to enter this place. Sensing everyone's stares, Yizong and Ichi said in unison, "It wasn't us." They really did not tell Xiao Xian how to enter this place. If not for the fact that the situation was not right and there was no time to explain, Yizong and Ichi would have sworn a long oath to prove their innocence. Everyone had just calmed down and prepared for battle when Xiao Xian's sudden appearance and disappearance made them uneasy again, especially Yituan. Since when could a tribesman do things that even the Yi family could not do? Yixiang did not say anything, but he stopped what he was doing. Both sides stared at Xiao Xian, who had reappeared. Xiao Xian was also confused. The battle had not begun. Xiao Xian had already noticed something strange about this place. He had left for so long, even had a meal and a nap. Why had the battle not begun yet? Xiao Xian had a guess. This place was different from the real world. The time was different. Chapter 795. To verify his suspicions, Xiao Xian decided to leave the dark world. The Yi family had not started fighting yet, and Xiao Xian felt that his reappearance had attracted the attention of the Yi family, especially Yixiang. Yixiang had been watching him ever since he appeared. Xiao Xian only wanted to see how capable Yixiang was. He did not want to provoke Yixiang here. Even though he was surrounded by darkness, the atmosphere was too tense. Xiao Xian didn't want to stay here and risk his life. He thought it would be better to wait until the 2 sides were almost done fighting before he came back. By then, both sides would have exhausted a lot of energy and wouldn't spend much time watching him. When he opened his eyes again, Xiao saw a pile of animal bones not far away. They were the remains of a snake that Cha-Cha had eaten. Before Xiao left and entered the dark world, Cha-Cha had just finished eating the snake. Recently, Cha-Cha had been eating snakes the most. Perhaps it was because he had almost been eaten by a snake when he first came to Eagle Mountain, but Cha-Cha had always been hostile towards snakes. He often caught snakes to eat in the forest and ate even more on the way to Eagle Mountain. Xiao remembered the snake bones not far away from Xiao. It had horns on both sides of its face, and its skull had horns as well. This type of snake was rare, and Xiao had only seen Cha-Cha eat it once before he entered the dark world. Therefore, the snake's skull not far away must be the one that Cha-Cha had eaten. Xiao felt that he hadn't been away for long this time. Although he had stopped for a while in that strange dark world to observe the people on both sides, it had only been about 10 minutes. But now, Xiao found that the blood on the snake's bones had changed color, and some of the remaining meat had begun to dry. According to the environment, it should have been nearly half a day since Cha-Cha finished eating the snake. As expected, the timing was off. Cha-Cha stood on top of the mountain wall, his pair of eagle eyes vigilantly staring at the surroundings. Ichi and Izone were still in the same state as before. At least, they did not seem to have changed. Xiao changed his strategy this time. Since the time between the two parties was not equal and he did not know if there was a fixed pattern, he did not act rashly. He decided to wait for the two parties to start fighting before going over to observe the situation. Instead of going over to investigate again and again, it was better to keep an eye on Ichi and Izone. This way, he could save a lot of energy. Time flowed slower in the dark world. Izone and Ichi's changes might not appear quickly. Therefore, while waiting, Xiao began to explore the method of using his consciousness to control them. Since this method could allow him to enter places that ordinary people could not reach and see figures that others could not see, then could he also discover other things? Xiao did not know if he could discover something new without entering the void. He could only try it himself. Xiao did not use the 8-rope knot method. Instead, he relied on the 2 times he had entered the dark world and the insights he had gained from the knots to explore on his own. Because he found that there were some similarities with the power of the ancestral bow and ornaments. Many of the key points were not difficult to understand. First, he had to find the bright white in his body. Perhaps it was similar to the legendary soul, a type of special life force that was based on the body. Because of his previous experience, Xiao did not spend too much time this time and found the bright white in his body. Next, Xiao used his consciousness to stimulate the power of the fire seed, using the bright white to find other similar existences. This time, Xiao did not use the power of Yinjiao's fire seed. Instead, he used a special power in his body that was similar to the power of the fire seed. In his sea of consciousness, a white line of fire appeared and surged towards the bright white. Then, it began to revolve around the bright white. Every time it revolved around the bright white, flames would appear. When the bright white was completely engulfed in flames, a spot of darkness appeared in the center. Then, the conspicuous black spot in the light gradually expanded to form a rotating black hole. When the black hole, which was engulfed in flames, expanded to the point where no flames could be seen, Xiao saw a dark world that was similar to the place where the Yi family had fought. However, this dark world was different from the one in the Yi family. Although it looked the same, Xiao felt that it was a completely different place. It was a similar dark world. It seemed that there was more than one such place. If possible, Xiao wanted to learn more about it from the Yi family. Upon closer inspection, Xiao realized that it was not completely dark. There were some faint spots of light, like looking at the stars in the sky when there were thin clouds. After sensing for a bit, Xiao realized that it was not dark to begin with. It was just that they were too far away. With a shift of his consciousness, Xiao realized that the things that were far away were starting to come closer. No, perhaps under the urging of his consciousness, he was rapidly approaching that place. As he got closer, the things that were originally not very clear became very clear. As long as Xiao Xian maintained this level of perception, he could continue to see the clear spots of light in the darkness. Previously, he had not been able to see them clearly. Now that he was closer, he realized that there were many faint flashes of blue light surrounding these spots of light. The range was not small either. Xiao Xian even felt as though he was standing in the middle of the universe. The aura of these spots of light gave Xiao Xian a sense of familiarity. It was not the aura of any tribe that he knew of. It was the aura of a beast. On Cha-Cha's body, there was a similar aura. Could be something from Eagle Mountain. As Xiao Xian continued to increase the intensity of his perception, he began to expend more and more energy. As his perception grew stronger, Xiao Xian could see more. The faint blue lights were actually blue flames. Similar to Xiao Xian's figure in this dark world, these blue flames also formed some strange shapes. For example, the bone-reading beasts used by the Yi family. Every spot of light represented a giant beast, and the figures formed by the blue flames were the rough outlines of the giant beasts. The spots of light at the core of these figures were not very close to each other. It was not that they were deliberately distancing themselves from each other, but that these giant beasts were simply too large. Even if they were piled up together, they would not be able to get close to each other. Even though the spots of light were not very close to each other, there were still a lot of them. From a distance, they looked like a galaxy of stars. Xiao Xian did not count how many spots of light there were. His attention was now on the figures formed by the blue flames. These figures were huge. Even the bone-reading beasts used by Yi Tuan and the rest were like palms compared to them. Xiao Xian had never hunted a giant beast like this in all his years of hunting. Other than the giant mountain eagles Xiao Xian had seen on the icy peak, there was another species that was not a giant eagle. It was the terrifyingly large crocodile he had encountered in the river when he went to Gongjia Valley. However, even the giant eagle and the terrifying crocodile on the mountaintop were slightly inferior in front of these figures. There were too many figures stacked on top of each other. Xiao Xian couldn't separate them all at once. Although he could not see them clearly, Xiao Xian was sure they were not in the shape of a giant mountain eagle. He had used too much energy, and it was difficult to continue. Xiao Xian retreated from the dark world first. He would take a closer look after he recovered some energy. Opening his eyes, Xiao Xian wiped the sweat off his face. His back was drenched in sweat from overexertion. The blue flame figures must be the true form of the giant beasts when they were alive. As he pondered, Xiao Xian turned to look at the mountain wall. Even with his special vision, he could only see thick rocks. Xiao Xian could not see anything on the other side of Eagle Mountain for now, so he could not know if there were giant skeletons at the foot of the mountain. He could only use his consciousness to enter another dark world to see what the naked eye could not see. Cha-Cha noticed Xiao Xian's abnormality and came over to call out worriedly. "I'm fine," Xiao Xian said as he stared at Cha-Cha. He looked at Cha-Cha carefully from head to toe, which confused Cha-Cha. "Huh?" Cha-Cha called out again. "Cha-Cha, do you know what your ancestors are? Do you know what they look like?" Xiao Xian asked. After hearing Xiao Xian's question, Cha-Cha paused for a moment, then looked up at the sky, as if there was something in the sky that attracted his attention. Then he looked around vigilantly, but didn't look at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was familiar with Cha-Cha's temperament. It was obviously avoiding the question. It did not want to answer Xiao Xian's question. Of course, it knew what the ancestor looked like. That was a secret of the giant mountain eagles. Only the eagles that had entered Eagle Mountain knew about it. Chapter 796. Cha-Cha didn't want to answer, so Xiao Xian didn't force him to answer. Xiao Xian knew from the Hui tribe that the great mountain eagles had many secrets. They didn't even bring anyone with them to Eagle Mountain. It was rare for Xiao Xian to follow a great mountain eagle to Eagle Mountain, and that was because he was raised by Xiao Xian, and this was his first time going to Eagle Mountain. Otherwise, other eagles wouldn't have allowed humans to follow them. Even if someone found Eagle Mountain, they might not be able to climb to the highest peak of the ice field. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to fly with the great mountain eagles to the real Eagle Mountain. It was just like Xiao Xian's situation back then. This tall and long mountain range was only a barrier. The real Eagle Mountain was where Xiao Xian saw the eagles flying after the mist on the peak of the ice field dispersed. The real Eagle Mountain was even taller than this mountain range. He couldn't see the top or the bottom. No one knew what was at the bottom of Eagle Mountain. However, if he explored it on a spiritual level through the special world of darkness, distance and barriers would no longer be a problem. After a short rest and some food, Xiao Xian glanced over at Yizong and Yizong. He noticed that the Yi family totem was brighter than before. However, that was the only difference. There weren't any obvious changes. Looking away, Xiao Xian decided to check out the figures that he suspected to be the ancestors of the great mountain eagles. With his previous success, Xiao Xian entered the world of darkness even faster this time. He walked up to the figures made of blue flames and counted them carefully. The number was astonishing. Many, too many, thousands, maybe even tens of thousands or even more. Although the figures made of blue flames contained life energy, it was different from the life energy of real living creatures. It is closer to the bone-reading beasts used by the Yi family. Of course, they were only similar in nature and weren't exactly the same. Moreover, the strength of life energy of these giant figures was very different from that of the Yi family's bone-reading beasts. These figures made of blue flames had greater life energy. They were like scattered fire seeds stacked together, just like the Yi family's formation. Countless figures of giant beasts were stacked together like firewood, emitting an ancient aura. The soul of Eagle Mountain. This word suddenly popped into Xiao Xian's mind. He tried to identify the individual giant beasts, but they were stacked so tightly together that he couldn't see them clearly. However, Xiao Xian had a rough idea of their general shape. They were indeed different from the giant mountain eagles, but they were somewhat similar to the small pterosaur he got out of the ice. The Cha-Cha didn't want to tell him any secrets about Eagle Mountain, but Xiao Xian was almost certain that these giant beasts were the secret of Eagle Mountain. They were the ancestors of the giant mountain eagles, the real ancient giant beasts. They were also one of the overlords that once ruled the world. Perhaps the time they existed was the era that the pterosaur that had survived from the ice was familiar with. A long time ago, when the Yinjiao tribe was still trapped on the other side of the boundless river and isolated from the rest of the world, Xiao Xian heard from the shaman that the giant mountain eagles had their own beliefs. They couldn't be tamed, and they couldn't accept the power of fire seeds from other tribes. Perhaps these giant mountain eagles were the beliefs of the giant mountain eagles. Generations of giant mountain eagles flew thousands of miles to Eagle Mountain. No matter if it was a young eagle or an old eagle that came here for the first time, they would all be reborn after coming here. It was similar to the awakening of totemic power or leveling up of totemic warriors. Many of these changes might have been caused by the stacked blue figures. These blue figures formed the fire pit of the giant mountain eagles, and they were the real core of the entire Eagle Mountain. When he first saw the frozen pterosaur, Xiao Xian wondered where the giant beast that once ruled the world and trampled humans at the bottom of the food chain had gone. Many tribes had records of their ancestors that recorded and preserved the ancient history, but there were very few records about the ancient era. Many tribes with a long history had the same story, but it was from the perspective of the tribe's fire seed. It was said that a long, long time ago, humans were still prey to the beasts. They weren't strong enough, and it was the fire seed that gave them power. It was the fire seed that brought humans to where they were today. No one knew what happened in the ancient times, but based on the evidence he found, he was sure that the fire seed had indeed changed the world. However, it wasn't just humans that changed the world. Every living thing in the world was changed too. Perhaps humans were the smartest, and they were the first to understand the use of the fire seed. The soul of Eagle Mountain was one of the pieces of evidence. Eagle Mountain wasn't the only place in the world that was similar to it. As for the other similar secret places that were unknown to the public, it was still unknown where they were. The world was so big that they only knew a corner of this forest. There were many more places that humans hadn't explored yet, but Xiao Xian had a feeling that they would come across them in the future. It was just a hunch. His head started to hurt, and he used up too much energy. So Xiao Xian left the world of darkness. As soon as he opened his eyes, Xiao Xian sensed the fluctuations of the fire seed's power. He looked at Yizong and the other man. The totemic flames that had been brightening were fluctuating, dimming for a moment, then brightening again. It had begun. For such fluctuations to occur, the two sides must have started fighting. As Xiao Xian rested, he observed Yizong and the other man's totemic flames. When Yizong and the other man's totemic flames weakened, the battle would have ended and Xiao Xian could go over to check it out. In the dark, empty world where the Yi family resided. After Xiao Xian disappeared again, Yixiang, who had been watching the Yi family, turned slightly to look at where Xiao Xian had appeared. After staring for a while, Yixiang made his move. His hand that had been holding the string of wooden ornaments began to move. His movements were small and could be missed if one wasn't paying attention. Yituan, who had been watching Yixiang cautiously, was surprised. Others might not be able to tell, but he knew what Yixiang was doing. Yixiang was performing a divination. Why was he performing a divination at a time like this? And the target of the divination could be the missing Yinjiao. Regardless of who Yixiang's target was or why he was doing it, Yituan had no time to think about it. He decided to seize this opportunity. Everything else could wait. The only thing they wanted to do now was to find a chance to deal with Yixiang. Without further ado, Yituan roared, "Go!" Almost at the same time, the three Yi family elders, including Yituan, attacked. 4 bright spots flew out from each of their hands. Just like the bone-reading beast, these spots transformed into giant beasts as they flew past the flames. Some were slender, some were heavy, some had carapaces, and some were like meteors with fireballs. These balls were images projected from the stones used for divination. Yituan and the others had made ample preparations before this. It was evident from the timing and momentum of their attacks. Under the aura created by the 3 of them, it gave people the feeling of a river flowing into the sea. 12 beasts and stones projected by bone, carapaces and stones shot towards Yixiang. The combined power of the 3 elders was astounding. Even in this dark void, it brought about a gust of wind. Among the people guarding the formation, those who were slightly weaker all had their breathing disrupted at this moment. Their chests were oppressed, and they could only feel the tremors under their feet. Their legs were numb for a moment, and their chests were oppressed. It was as if there was not enough air to breathe. Yixiang did not panic at the sudden attack. He did not move or turn around, one hand still holding the wooden ornaments. Facing the Yi family, he raised his other arm towards the arc of fire in the totem, as though he was casually shaking off dust from his sleeve. He waved his arm downwards, pointing at the arc of fire not far away. The moment Yixiang swung his arm down, the arc of fire on the totem suddenly flared up as if someone had poured oil on it. The flames grew 10 times bigger. By then, the bone-reading beasts had reached them. They did not slow down in the face of the wall of fire, charging straight into it. The moment they collided, there was a sudden explosion of power. The wall of fire and the arc of fire in front of Yixiang spewed out like lava from a volcano, its aura spreading outwards. As the attacks of the bone-reading beasts and the bone-reading stones collided, booming sounds rang out continuously. The fire wall formed by the elongated flames was like a sturdy city wall, blocking the concentrated attacks. The flickering of the flames was no longer the sound of a normal bonfire being blown by the wind, but more like the hysterical roar of a ferocious beast. The blossoming heat waves swept up the exploding sparks and splashed in all directions, flying as far as the eye could see. If one could see the expressions on everyone's faces, they would have noticed a change in Yituan and the other 2's eyes. When they launched their attack, their eyes were burning with anticipation, hoping that this attack would work. Even if they could not seriously injure Yixiang, just inflicting some damage on him would be enough for them to be excited. But very quickly, the anticipation in their eyes and the flames of desire in their hearts were mostly extinguished. What replaced it was shock, intense disappointment, and sorrow that was beginning to spread. It was just that no one knew about this. This was the first large-scale collision between the two sides. There was no sand or pebbles here, but everyone felt like they were in the middle of a storm, their bodies about to fall apart. The bone-reading beasts attacked in a frenzy, determined to break through the wall even at the cost of their own lives. At their peak, one of the beasts opened its mouth, only an arm's length away from Ixiong. That was how ferocious and frenzied their attacks were. But unlike the fire path, Ixiong was calm on the other side of the fire path. Not a single spark flew in his direction. Even when the bone-reading beasts were only an arm's length away, he did not make any extra movements. After waving his hand, he continued what he was doing, as if he did not notice anything. He was just defending, not even glancing at Yituan. Ixiong maintained his posture, as if the combined attack of the three did not matter at all. Ignored. Blatant disdain. Yituan and the others were already furious when they heard him say, "Your generation is not good." Now, he was using reality to prove to the Yi family that he was not lying. This was Ixiong, the one the Yi family had failed to kill back then. The Yi family was unlucky. On the other side, when Xiaoxian noticed that the totemic flames around Yizong and Yituan were beginning to change, he did not divert his attention to anything else. Instead, he kept watch. The totemic flames around Yizong and Yituan grew stronger at first, then began to ripple violently. The two Yizong and Yituan seemed to be under great pressure, their bones creaking and their veins popping under their skin. Looks like the Yi family is not doing too well either, Xiaoxian thought. This situation lasted for 3 days before the totemic flames around Yizong and Yituan slowed down. It's over. Xiaoxian secretly guessed, but immediately denied it. It shouldn't be so soon. He had waited here for 3 days, but on the other side, not much time had passed. Perhaps the clash between the two sides had just come to an end. Should he go over and take a look? Let's see if the Yi family has the upper hand, or if the mysterious unlucky has the upper hand. Xiaoxian had been waiting for the past few days, keeping himself in good condition, ready to enter the world of darkness again at any time. Chapter 797. Xiaoxian had just appeared in this dark world where the Yi family was fighting when he felt a wave of heat wash over him. His vision was filled with balls of fire. Without thinking too much, he mobilized the power of his fire seed and used it as a shield to block the large balls of flames that were smashing towards him like a group of meteors. Judging from the situation, the Yi family must have fought at least once while he was away. While he was thinking, a spear of fire shot toward Xiaoxian. Sensing the approaching danger, Xiaoxian did not have time to think. His body reflexively took 2 steps back. The spear of orange-red flames almost brushed past Xiaoxian. Xiaoxian could even feel the scorching heat from the spear. It felt like he would have been burned if he had been 1 step slower. "You're finally here." A slightly hoarse and indifferent voice rang out. Xiaoxian looked up. It was Ixiong. But unlike his previous nonchalant tone, Ixiong's words were laced with murderous intent. The center of the battlefield looked calm, but anyone could tell that a large-scale battle had just taken place here. There were several bone-reading beasts on the Yi family's side. There were also some balls of fire that he could not identify. There were a total of 12 of them. Even though he could not see their faces, Xiaoxian could sense the tension in the Yi family's camp. It was obvious that they had not had the upper hand in the previous battles. Even though they looked powerful and imposing, they could not hide their anxiety. Their morale was unstable and they lacked confidence. Ixiong was still standing there alone. He had not looked much different from when Xiaoxian left last time. If not for the fact that Xiaoxian had been keeping an eye on the Yi family situation, keeping an eye on Yizong's movements even when he was not here, and seeing the scattered balls of fire when he arrived, no one would have thought that Ixiong had just fought someone. Unlike the commotion in the Yi family camp, Ixiong looked too calm, so calm that it sent chills down everyone's spines. The Yi family did not pay much attention to Xiaoxian's appearance. Right now, most of them were not in the mood to think about this tribesman who came and went as he pleased. Only Yituan had looked at Xiaoxian for a few seconds when he appeared. After that, they stared at Ixiong warily, waiting for his next move. Yituan's heart was bitter and sorrowful. He did not know Ixiong's true strength from the earlier clash, but he had a rough idea. Ixiong was indeed much stronger than they had imagined. The 100 of them would not be able to do anything to Ixiong, much less gain the upper hand. Yituan also felt that the once powerful Yi family was beginning to decline. Beneath their prosperous facade, they were now so weak. Yituan could not refute Ixiong's words when he first appeared. Ixiong's "your generation is no good" was the first slap in the face. They wanted to retaliate, but reality proved that they were slapped again, and this time it was even more painful. As for Xiao Xian, Yituan did not expect Xiao Xian to be able to defeat Ixiong. If they could not do it, this tribesman was even worse. However, they might be able to use this tribesman's appearance to their advantage. While Yituan's mind was in turmoil, Ixiong paid no attention to the Yi family camp. Instead, he was staring at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian felt two sharp glints shooting out of Ixiong's eyes. This person was coming for him. Murderous intent. Even more so than the Yi family camp. Xiao Xian, why was there such a deep grudge? Ixiong had caused trouble for Rock Hill City and turned Xiao Xian into a zombie. Of course, Ixiong would not treat Xiao Xian kindly. However, Xiao Xian did not think that his grudge with Ixiong was greater than the Yi family. After all, it was the Yi family who forced Ixiong to flee to another mainland. Even Yi had said that if Ixiong attacked the Yi family, he would annihilate the entire family. He did not care that they were all from the same tribe. But now, Ixiong seemed to want to kill Xiao Xian more than the Yi family. Xiao Xian only wanted to use the Yi family's war to see how powerful the legendary Ixiong was, and to see how capable the people behind Rock Hill City were. But who knew that they would encounter such a situation? When he first came here, Ixiong did not react this way. Did something unexpected happen while he was away? Xiao Xian's suspicions were mixed with his wariness. He planned to escape. So be it. His previous plan was based on the assumption that Ixiong would hate the Yi family even more. But now, Ixiong's target was Xiao Xian himself. Xiao Xian did not need to stay here any longer. This was the Yi family's main battlefield, not his. He would be an idiot to fight the Yi family here. However, after trying a few times with his consciousness, Xiao Xian realized that the method he used to leave this place was completely useless now. He couldn't get out. Since you're here, you might as well stay. Ixiong's voice sounded like it was blown by the desert wind. He was like a predator hiding in the desert, finally baring his fangs. Ixiong's nonchalant attitude changed. Before he even finished speaking, he had already started moving, not giving Xiao Xian, Yituan, and the rest any time to react. In front of Ixiong, the wall of fire that the bone-reading beast could not pass through suddenly surged upwards, like a volcano that had been brewing for a long time and was about to erupt. With the wall of fire as its center, powerful flames flowed. Orange-red with hints of white spread rapidly in all directions. Spread again. The real storm was finally coming. Just the spreading flames were like a raging river, forcing the bone-reading beasts to retreat. In comparison, Ixiong's behavior in the previous battle was nothing but mild. Sharp, powerful, murderous, without a trace of hesitation. This was the Ixiong now, or perhaps the real Ixiong. Even though they could not see Yituan and the rest's expressions, it was clear how shocked they were. However, what shocked them even more was yet to come. The wall of fire under Ixiong's control that seemed to connect heaven and earth began to change from top to bottom. At the top of the wall of fire expanded outwards like a giant umbrella. Below them, waves of fire spread in all directions. "Oh no!" Yituan shouted. "He's going to trap us all here." Another person beside Yituan exclaimed. Those who came were the best of the Yi family's main branch, or people of high status. If none of them made it back, Yituan did not dare to imagine what would happen to the Yi family. The balance of the royal city was supported by the strength of the 6 tribes. If any of them weakened, the other 5 tribes would turn into wolves and pounce on the weak prey, not giving it time to breathe or rise again. Yituan only had one word in his mind: extermination. Ixiong really did want to exterminate the entire family. Ixiong had delayed his attack until now, because he was waiting for Xiao Xian to come out, then trap Xiao Xian and the Yi family here. Yituan did not know why Yi Xiong targeted Xiao Xian. He only wanted to send the Yi family out. Even if he could only send 1/10 of them out, it would reduce the Yi family's losses. Yi Xiong seemed to have transformed into another person. Although they could not see Yi Xiong's face clearly, anyone who looked at him would feel as though they had encountered a ferocious storm. In the world of darkness, Yi Xiong's wall of fire seemed to envelop the entire world. "Retreat!" Yituan shouted, but it was too late. They could not leave. The Yi family also realized this. Xiao Xian wanted to run when he saw the spreading waves of fire beneath his feet. But no matter how fast he ran, he seemed to be stuck in the same spot, trapped with the Yi family. The world under the control of consciousness was different from the real world. Just like when Xiao Xian discovered the giant creatures in Eagle Mountain, distance was a blur. Retreat? There was no way out. The umbrella-like fire shield above the wall of fire was already covering them, connecting with the flames beneath their feet to form an enclosed space. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines. They were like prey trapped in a cage, waiting to be slaughtered. Helplessness, powerlessness, despair. Yi Xiong's figure formed by flames became clearer. Even his facial expressions were detailed. Everyone's faces could not be seen because of the flames. But now, Yi Xiong's facial features became clearer. They could see the shape of his eyes, nose, mouth, and even the slightest movement of his sleeves. It was far clearer than Yituan and the rest's images. That was why Yi Xiong had not used his full strength in the previous battle. He had only defended, not attacked. Yituan and the other two could not harm Yi Xiong at all, even with the help of the 100-man formation. Now, they could not do anything to Yi Xiong unless they used other means. In the dark world, Yi Xiong stood there, his aura strong, cold, and domineering. It was as if he was the only one in control of this sealed world, the true ruler. If not for the fact that the Yi family were the ones being slaughtered, they would have instinctively feared Yi Xiong. Unfortunately, this person showed no mercy to the Yi family. This frightened the Yi family, but they could not muster the will to resist. Xiao Xian finally felt like he had dug his own grave. Chapter 798. When the flames from above and below sealed the area, Xiao Xian suddenly felt a chill seeping out from his bones. Although it was the flames that sealed the area, he felt like he was in an ice cave. His blood and energy were flowing at a slower speed, especially the energy and energy flow needed to leave this area. It was clearly frozen. If the energy in his body could not complete this flow, he would not be able to leave this dark world. Xiao Xian looked at the floor of flames beneath his feet. This had sealed off any chance of escape. He knew that Yi Xiong wanted to seal him and the 100 people from the Yi family here. Xiao Xian and the rest of the Yi family were like vegetables in a pot, while Yi Xiong was the one adding fuel to the fire. Thinking of this, Xiao Xian could not help but shiver. He could not understand why Yi Xiong was so hostile towards him. Yi Xiong did not even look at Yituan and the rest. Xiao Xian would be lying if he said he did not regret putting himself in this predicament. But there was no time for regrets. Instead of thinking about this, he might as well use the time to think of a way out of this predicament. Xiao Xian looked at the Yi family. He did not know this place well and might not be able to think of an effective way out in such a short period of time. However, the Yi family should be familiar with this place. So, what would the Yi family do in this situation? If the Yi family could come up with an effective plan, Xiao Xian would know what to work on even if he could not replicate the Yi family's abilities. Of course, Xiao Xian would not place all his hopes on the Yi family. He was also thinking hard about how to get out of this predicament. The sealed area was divided into 2 parts, with a firewall in front of Yi Xiong as the boundary. Yi Xiong stood on one side, while Xiao Xian and the rest of the Yi family stood on the other. However, Xiao Xian was alone and did not have as strong a presence as Yi Xiong. So at first glance, it looked like there were only 2 sides facing off, Yi Xiong and the Yi family. The Yi family reacted quickly. Even though the Yi family was less experienced and less capable, Yituan and the other 2 had already considered the situation. They came up with multiple guesses, but no matter which one they chose, they were not confident. In the end, Yituan chose the most conservative option. He did not plan to fight Yi Xiong to the death with these 100 people. He decided to leave first. This was the first time they had a clear understanding of Yi Xiong's abilities. After they left, they had to think of other ways to stop Yi Xiong from wiping out the entire family. Yi Xiong was already on the move. The wall of fire, which looked like a heavenly wall, was no longer in a defensive position. As Yi Xiong pushed his palm forward, the wall of fire charged forward with the ferocity of 10,000 beasts. It was as if nothing in its path could stop it, as if it wanted to crush and flatten everything in its path. Not just one or two bone-reading beasts, but an entire wall of fire. In such a sealed space, there was simply no chance for anyone to escape. Even though this was not a physical body, Xiao Xian's back was drenched in sweat from nervousness. He looked at the wall of fire that was closing in on him. There was no way he could escape. He turned to look at the Yi family. As expected, the people at the front were starting to move. This time, Yituan and the other two did not use their bone-reading beasts. Yituan raised a hand, holding something that looked like a tortoise shell. Croc, croc, croc. A series of collisions rang out, as if hard objects like bones were colliding with each other. Yituan shouted, reaching forward with the tortoise shell. In the next instant, the tortoise shell in his hand shone brightly. It was not a speck of light like the bone-reading beasts, but a ball of light. The ball of light shot forward like a shooting star. Along the way, the ball of light rapidly changed. Break! In that instant, Xiao Xian felt as if a mountain was crashing down on him. The pressure on his body was increasing at an alarming rate. Whoosh! The sound of wind whipping the flames seemed to spread to every corner of the world. Even the pressure from Yi Xiong's wall of fire was pushed aside. Rumble! The sound of wind and fire changed into a thunderous roar. Everything around him was shaking. Xiao Xian's entire body was swaying. In his field of vision, endless flames spewed out from the ball of light. The flames intertwined in the sky. In the midst of the flames, a huge figure rushed out. Xiao Xian stared in shock at the enormous creature. Was that a tortoise? Unlike the tortoises Xiao Xian had seen before, the tortoise that appeared in front of him had a slender body. Its neck and tail were much longer than the tortoises Xiao Xian was familiar with. There were some thorns behind its neck and many protruding thorns on its tail. Its shell was undulating like hills, unlike the snapping tortoise in the Flaming Horns tribe, which had a sharp, jagged back. Instead, it had a heavy feeling like a mountain. Its form was secondary. What shocked Xiao Xian was its eyes. It was huge. It was almost the same size as the giant beast Xiao Xian had seen at Eagle Mountain. Yituan's bone-reading beast could not even compare to a single claw of this giant tortoise. An ancient giant beast. This was Xiao Xian's first thought. The Yi family actually had something like this. In fact, the Yi family did not have many tools made from the bones of ancient giant beasts. In fact, they were considered rare. The Yi family's divination tools were all made by themselves or with the help of others. Only a few were passed down from their ancestors. The one Yituan was using was one of the rare artifacts passed down from their ancestors. There have been some ancestral artifacts, but most of them have been destroyed after being used in some incident. This was one of the most precious artifacts passed down from generation to generation. Tribes without fire pits had special burial grounds for their tribesmen, which was their tribe's graveyard. Of the 6 major tribes in the royal city, the other 5 had their own graveyard. The Yi family was an exception. Although they had their own graveyard, many of them preferred to find their own graves. The more capable a person was, the more likely they were to find their own graves. When they felt that their time was up, they would leave the tribe, and the artifacts they had would be buried with them. Just like how the Ji family prepared grain in their graves, the Yi family's necessities were their own tools for divination. There were very few people who had the ability to find the grave of one of the Yi family's ancestors, the courage to dig up their graves, and the ability to control the dead artifacts. This was also the reason why the Yi family did not have many ancestral oracles. Yi Xiong was right when he said that their generation was not capable. Their divination tools were not as good as their ancestors. This was also a reflection of their strength. Even Yi Tuan, who held a high position in the Yi family, had to give up on his own bone divination and take out his ancestor's artifact. Yi Xiang's body did not look strong, but it was powerful enough to force Yi Tuan to take out his ancestor's artifact. The palm-sized tortoise shell could only be seen at a time like this. The giant tortoise opened its mouth and stretched its neck, its throat moving. An ancient and vigorous roar that Xiao Xian had never heard before came out of its mouth. It carried an insufferably domineering aura, as if it had traversed through endless time and space. Witnessing this scene with his own eyes was more shocking than anything recorded in any tribe's ancestral records. Along with the roar, an immense pressure seemed to erupt. Xiao Xian felt the pressure around him increase exponentially. A huge force was crashing down on him. Under this pressure, Xiao Xian felt like a grasshopper that couldn't jump up. He could be crushed to death in the next moment. Xiao Xian forced himself to look up, only to see the giant tortoise propping up its four limbs and running forward due to inertia. Then, the moment before it collided with the wall of fire, it raised its two front limbs to block the wall of fire. Boom! The two giant tortoise feet stomped heavily on the ground. The entire tortoise's body shook violently, the flames that made up its body splashing everywhere. As for the wall of fire, it exploded with countless sparks. The sealed flames under the giant tortoise's feet trembled violently as it stomped on the ground. Like boiling water, the flames splashed upwards with gurgling sounds. Within the sealed area, the flames on the wall of fire and the ground under their feet splashed with the tremors. The intertwining flames seemed to cover the sky and the sun. The giant tortoise's roar seemed to bring people into a strange, ancient battlefield. Xiao Xian's entire body suddenly bent under the pressure of the collision between the two sides. Then, with great difficulty, he straightened his back bit by bit. In front of him, one side was a powerful freak, and the other side was an ancient giant beast that had been released. Under the collision of the two, everything else would be reduced to cannon fodder. Xiao Xian was about to become cannon fodder under the endless roaring flames. Xiao Xian seemed to hear the bones in his body creaking under the heavy pressure. Even though Xiao Xian was not close to the center of the battlefield, just the enormous aura and pressure, as well as the shock waves caused by the collision between the two, were enough to easily crush him. The sound of wind and fire was like a war drum beating in his ears. Above his head, below his feet, and all around his body, there was an enormous pressure and shock waves that could tear people apart. His vision was filled with flying flames, densely packed. Xiao Xian could no longer see the giant tortoise's figure clearly. He felt as if he was standing in the middle of magma at the mouth of a volcano. Scorching heat waves were rolling all around him. Strong winds whistled, like red-hot knives hanging on his body. Every breath he took was like a fire burning in his nasal cavity. It was as if all the pores on his body were wide open and steam was spewing out. The pressure around him was still increasing. The pressure his body could withstand was about to exceed its limit. If this continued, Xiao Xian would only have one outcome, death. Unless he could forcefully hack out a sliver of a chance to live under such enormous pressure and energy fluctuations, he had to think of a way. The Yi family's countermeasure was to use the giant tortoise to resist Yi Xiang's wall of fire. Xiao Xian, on the other hand, had to think of a way to survive, not to mention leaving. Should he use the bone-reading beast like the Yi family? Xiao Xian did not have a bone-reading beast, but he had an ancestor. Chapter 799. Under the immense pressure, Xiao Xian felt like he was in a predicament of ice and fire. On the outside, there were scorching heat waves and flames. On the inside, it was as if his blood had been frozen. No matter what he wanted to do now, the first thing he had to do was to circulate the power that seemed to have been frozen in his body. This was a different world from the physical world. It was a world of spirit and consciousness. Spirit, consciousness, that bright spot. That bright white spot in his sea of consciousness was the core that allowed Xiao Xian to stand here. Xiao Xian controlled the seemingly frozen white power that was different from Yin Jiao's fire seed and slowly broke the ice. 1 round, 2 rounds. When the white power began to recover, Xiao Xian could clearly feel that his body, which was originally as cold as ice, began to warm up. However, this situation did not last for long. The power that had just started to become active seemed sluggish again. It was as if melted water had started to freeze again under low temperatures. Again, there was no time to breathe. He had to follow closely. If he wanted to break the ice, he had to break it all the way. Otherwise, if he stopped for even a moment, he would end up frozen again. Xiao Xian controlled the white power and slowly circulated it around the bright white spot that was surrounded by the flames. Some of the frozen white power began to circulate again. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. It was as if the surrounding ice was melting again. As the white power circulated again, Xiao Xian could feel that the cold in his body was beginning to weaken. The frozen power was gradually recovering. Faster, faster. Fireballs of various sizes came crashing down from all directions like a group of meteorites. They directly smashed into Xiao Xian's body and exploded into brilliant flames. Pain? He could no longer feel it. He was numb. Xiao Xian gritted his teeth and endured the huge impact. If this was normal ground, his legs would have sunk into the ground already. However, the flames beneath his feet were responsible for sealing him, so he could not sink any further. If this continued, Xiao Xian would be crushed to the ground. Xiao Xian did not have much time to slowly thaw. His body was close to the limit of what it could withstand. If he could not mobilize his power in a short period of time to block the impact of the external force, Xiao Xian would only end up dead. He had to seize the time to control the thawing power in his body, guiding the heat to circulate. Meanwhile, on the Yi family's side, Yituan was in no mood to check on Xiao Xian's situation. He had even forgotten that there was a tribesman here. Perhaps in his heart, he already thought that Xiao Xian had been reduced to cannon fodder. There was only one thought in Yituan's mind. He was trying to find a crack. This was Yituan's plan too. He took out his ancestor's bone oracle. His purpose was not only to block the wall of fire, but also to borrow the strength of the wall of fire and the power created by the bone oracle to break the barrier that was restricting them, even if it was just a thin crack. If Yixiang could create a crack in this cage-like boundary, they would be able to escape through it. It did not need to be big. As long as there was a small crack, the boundary would not be completely sealed, and they would be able to escape. A crack. Where was the crack? Yituan tried his best to find a crack, afraid that he would miss it. But to his disappointment, there was none. The boundary was still intact, without a single scratch. How was this possible? They had taken out the bone oracle left behind by their ancestors. It could be said that this was the strongest bone oracle they had at the moment, but there was not a single crack in it. What did this mean? This meant that Yixiang's power had far exceeded their expectations. The giant tortoise blocking the wall of fire could only hold on for a while. Yituan had no idea how long it could last. Reality hit him again and again, causing the usually calm Yituan to panic. If even the oracle bone objects left behind by their ancestors were unable to give them a chance to escape, then what should they do to avoid being completely annihilated? Yituan racked his brains for a solution. The Yi family was quick-witted and could think of many things in an instant. Even so, Yituan could not come up with a satisfactory solution. It was not just Yituan. The 2 elders beside Yituan did not rest either. Their brains were probably the most active they had ever been in their lives. What should they do? Just as they were racking their brains, a strange energy wave appeared from another direction. Yituan couldn't help glancing over. His heart raced at the sight of the figure. A powerful aura suddenly appeared, pressing down on the surroundings. Xiao Xian controlled all the power in his body, circulating it according to a specific rule, sparing no expense. The thawed power gathered together, surging out like a tidal wave. Amidst the roars of wind and fire caused by the confrontation between the 2 heroes, in the world of orange-red flames, a crimson flame that was clearly of a different color suddenly rushed up. It was as if a bolt of lightning had suddenly split open, forcibly squeezing out a gap in this world. A huge figure formed in the middle of the crimson flame, like a battle axe in a sea of fire. Its rising aura turned into a whirlwind, shattering all obstacles around it. Amidst the twisting orange-red and crimson waves of fire, the gigantic figure that appeared once again expanded. Around the gigantic figure, the crimson waves of fire that emerged savagely attacked the surroundings, as if they were a ferocious beast that was crazily expanding its territory. Amidst the crisscrossing flames, amidst the spiritual awareness of the Eve family, the huge figure was like an alien, a demon that crawled out of hell. Yixiang was not the only one to notice. He had been looking in Xiao Xian's direction the entire time, not giving Yituan any extra attention. He did not show any signs of surprise, as if he had expected this. Bone-reading beast? Why does he have a bone-reading beast? Someone in the totem array exclaimed. Doesn't he have the ability to read grass? Where did he get it from? That's... Yizong exclaimed. That appeared when Yin Jiao left. However, this one was even bigger than the flame giant he had seen before. It was as big as the giant tortoise. Back then, Yizong and the Royal City Army had chased after Yin Jiao's migration team. They had been stopped by the flame giant and had not been able to catch up in time. In the end, Yin Jiao's team had retreated from the mainland. That's the flame giant you mentioned before? Yituan was confused. Wasn't the flame giant Yizong had seen corporeal? Why would it appear here? Corporeal? The power of bone-reading beast could be corporeal, but it was different from the one in the spiritual world. It was controlled differently and required more power. To the Eve family, a materialized bone-reading beast was too wasteful. All they needed to do was attack a person's consciousness. There was no need to materialize it. Some in the Eve family recalled the flame giant Yizong had mentioned when he returned with the Royal City Army. Back then, some had suspected that it was similar to a corporeal bone-reading beast. However, no one believed that a crude tribesman could have such power, much less the Eve family's control method. So, that's really a giant. How did the tribesman do it? When he first appeared, his figure was blurry. Where did he get the power to control such a huge giant? Also, what kind of person did the Yin Jiao tribe use to make such a terrifying thing? Did such a giant really exist? No, he's not using bone reading. That's different from bone reading. Yituan stared, many thoughts running through his mind. After calming down, Yituan could tell if it was bone reading. Bone reading, regardless of whether it was a human or a beast, would have its own unique energy waves. However, they did not feel any aura or energy waves from Xiao Xian at all. If it was not bone reading, then what was it? Even the bone oracle in their hands, although it was left behind by their ancestors, their heirs had been using the best bone oracle to raise it. Only then could this bone oracle be used to its fullest potential. But a mere tribesman, what exactly did he have in his hands? What did he rely on? The giant tortoise that was blocking the wall of fire raised its head and roared. The tortoise's palms that came into contact with the wall of fire and stepped on the barrier at the bottom shook violently. Countless flames once again exploded from the wall of fire and the barrier at the bottom. Accompanying this was a tremor that could make people fall apart. The Eve family had a giant totemic formation protecting them. Even if there was a tremor, the impact would be greatly reduced. Before this, Xiao Xian was the one who was affected the most. However, at this moment, Xiao Xian's figure stood firmly in the middle of the flame giant that had suddenly appeared. With the pressure gone, Xiao Xian had a rare moment to catch his breath. However, Yixiang did not intend to give Xiao Xian the chance to recover. He raised his arm and swung it at Xiao Xian. As Yixiang swung his arm, the wall of fire, which had been stopped by the giant tortoise, surged towards Xiao Xian like a flood breaking through a dam. Xiao Xian could feel the overwhelming pressure coming at him, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. He could not retreat. There was no way out. Under the impact of the orange-red waves of fire, the huge crimson figure took a few steps back from the initial impact and slowly stabilized itself. Then, step by step, it walked forward. The giant's body was surrounded by waves of fire. It was difficult for him to move. Every step he took was accompanied by a huge impact, as if he was going against the current. Chapter 800. The torrent of flames grew stronger. Xiao Xian could feel the resistance in front of him increasing. Every step was heavier. The most obvious sign of this was that the ground shook violently with every step the flame giant took. The torrent of flames suddenly split into several streams, rising up like fire snakes and rushing towards the flame giant. The crimson figure waved its arms, its huge palms carrying a ferocious aura. There were no fancy tricks. Its movements were not as clumsy as its size suggested. It was fast, direct, and domineering, pressing down on the oncoming fire snakes. It was as if no creature could escape from its palms. All the fire snakes exploded at the same time. The fire snakes shattered into countless balls of fire, scattering in all directions. The wind created by the flame giant's arms swept away the flames in front of Xiao Xian. Yituan stared blankly at the moving red figure. He still could not understand. What was Xiao Xian's giant? He could only vaguely sense that it was different from the bone-reading beast they used. A giant of this size should not exist in this world. Perhaps there was another reason for its size, but Yituan did not dwell on it. He did not have time to think about Xiao Xian's flame giant. He was also shocked by Xiao Xian's strong vitality. He thought that the tribesmen would have disappeared in the battle between the giant tortoise and Yixiang. But now, not only was Xiao Xian alive and kicking, he was even causing such a huge commotion. Was this the chance of survival that had finally appeared as he had divined before? His ancestor's bone oracle could not create a crack in the boundary. Then what about the tribesmen? Would they see a chance of survival in the midst of danger? At this thought, Yituan focused again, searching for any possible cracks in the boundary. They would retreat as soon as a crack appeared. He could see that Yixiang was more hostile towards Xiao Xian than them. Even without looking, he could sense that Yixiang had diverted more forces to deal with the tribesmen. Yituan admitted that Xiao Xian's flame giant was impressive and powerful. It might not lose to their ancestor's bone oracle, but it might not last long against Yixiang's attacks. However, Yituan did not care. In fact, he was secretly delighted. Yixiang's attention was on Xiao Xian. That meant they had more time to escape. As for Xiao Xian's life, Yituan did not care. More and more flames surged out of the wall, and the red giant's steps slowed. Everyone knew that he was reaching his limit, and when he could no longer stand, he would be engulfed by the torrent of flames. When that happened, Xiao Xian would be finished too. The family was relieved that Yixiang did not use this move on them. Even with the giant tortoise and the totemic formation of 100 people, they might not have lasted as long as the tribesmen. Xiao Xian could feel the power flowing through his body, reaching its peak. Every part of his body felt like an overloaded machine, crackling and rattling as if it would fall apart at any moment. His feet felt as if they were bound by solid and heavy chains. Even if it was just a small distance, it was extremely difficult for him to walk, let alone stand firm and withstand the torrent of flames that was constantly rushing towards him. He could not retreat. Even if it was just a small step, one step back would lead to a second step, a third step, until he was overwhelmed and drowned. All the white power in his body began to circulate. Xiao Xian no longer felt cold. Instead, his blood felt like it was boiling from the constant flow of power, steam spewing out his body. At this moment, Xiao Xian suddenly realized that in his sea of consciousness, the white egg-shaped barrier that had been covering the totemic flames had started to melt. The shield gradually turned white and flowed outwards. Soon, there was no trace of a shield on the outer layer of the totemic flames. Although the white veil had disappeared, Xiao Xian did not feel the white energy leaving him. It was still around him and had not left. Not only that, Xiao Xian also felt that they were in his control. His 5 senses, which had been somewhat numb, sharpened again. The pressure around him was also rapidly decreasing, as if someone had moved a mountain that had been pressing down on him. His body suddenly felt lighter, and even his breathing became smoother. Within Xiang's orange-red flames, the giant red figure stopped advancing but did not retreat. It stood there like a silent thinker. Within the Yi family's totemic array, the people who had been watching Xiao Xian thought to themselves, is he finally unable to hold on? However, in the next moment, they suddenly felt a huge pressure coming from that direction. It was even stronger than when the Crimson Giant had appeared. What was going on? Even Yi Tuan, who had been searching for a crack in the barrier, could not help but look over. He felt a strong sense of apprehension, even fear. Over there, it seemed like something that had been sleeping for a long time was about to appear. "It's the totemic energy," exclaimed an elder beside Yi Tuan. When a fire seed's power formed a totem, it would emit energy waves unique to it. Before this, Xiao Xian had appeared and left without a totem under his feet. This overturned the Yi family's understanding. Logically speaking, even if Xiao Xian had mastered part of the Yi family's divination skills and could enter this place, a totem would have appeared whenever a person appeared. But they had never seen a Yinjiao totem appear under Xiao Xian's feet. Was the kid finally forming a totem? No, he was just starting to form a totem. This was unbelievable to the Yi family. He could not even form a totem, yet he was able to walk around peacefully. This totem had come too late. Also, why was there such a huge commotion when the kid formed a totem? Just the early stages of the totem's formation already gave off a great pressure. Was Yinjiao's totem really that powerful? Wait, that's not Yinjiao's totem. Yi Tuan was shocked. He sensed something strange. That's definitely not Yinjiao's totem. But what I sensed was the prelude to the totem's appearance. If it's not Yinjiao's totem, what is it? Asked the elder beside Yi Tuan. Just as the Yi family members were guessing, the flood that was about to drown the crimson figure was suddenly pushed aside, as if it had met with an obstacle. It was as if a pair of invisible hands had blocked the onslaught of flames. Around the flame giant, the torrent of flames that had been constantly attacking the flame giant was separated. But Yi Tuan's group and Xiang did not pay much attention to this. They were staring at the white flames that had suddenly appeared under the crimson giant's feet. Two white lines of fire crisscrossed, forming 8 at each end. The two lines of fire looked like two elongated gongs, stacked vertically and horizontally. The two crisscrossing work runes were still expanding, and the torrents of flames were also blocked. The space around the flame giant was also getting bigger and bigger. What the hell is that? Someone shouted. He had never seen a tribe's totem in that shape. Wasn't that a Yinjiao? Wasn't Yinjiao's totem double-horned? Why was this happening? Many in the Yi family's totem formation took several steps back uncontrollably, as if a great pressure was pushing them away. Even Yi Tuan took great effort to steady himself. He did not retreat, but still felt an oppressive pressure. If he had a physical body, he would have coughed up blood. If one could see Yi Tuan's eyes, they would see shock and fear in them, as though he had seen something unimaginably terrifying. Yi Tuan felt a cold electric current coursing through every hair on his body. His hair stood on end as he shivered. Fear, worry. In that moment, these emotions were pushed to the back. Yi Tuan's only thought was, why did this pattern appear in this situation? The atmosphere was a little strange. Even those who did not understand what the dual rune represented could feel the uneasiness of the three elders led by Yi Tuan. Their hearts sank. The white flames in the shape of a cross caused the entire battlefield to stop momentarily. Xiang's hand trembled as he held the bracelet. The flame giant's appearance did not affect Xiang, but the white flame pattern did. On Xiao Xian's side, changes did not stop because of the double horn pattern. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a tyrannical force rushing up from under his feet. As the white flames expanded, the force became more intense, as if it wanted to break through everything around it and crush everything in its path. Xiao Xian's figure, which was originally made of flames, seemed to merge with the flame giant when it appeared. But now, white flames appeared from all parts of Xiao Xian's body, pulling behind him. Xiao Xian's figure became clear again. Half a step behind Xiao Xian, the white light that seeped out began to gather again, no longer spreading in other directions. The gathering ball of light continued to expand. Even the light from Etuan's oracles paled in comparison. If the giant tortoise's white light was like the stars in the night sky, then the white light gathering behind Xiao Xian was like the sun that illuminated the world. The white light gathered to form a blurry figure. It was not large, like a clone of Xiao Xian, but the flames were different, so it was not clear. Based on the Yi family standard, the blurry figure was like Xiao Xian when he first arrived, an unstable newbie who could vanish at any time. But contrary to the Yi family's perception, the moment the white blurry figure appeared, the three-way stalemate on the battlefield changed again. Due to the appearance of the white double-work runes, a large area of empty space was revealed around the flame giant. From time to time, some white flames would jump up and down, and the tyrannical might that the flame giant displayed was several times stronger than when it first appeared. In this situation, the Yi family's totemic array appeared weaker. Etuan felt stifled, a mouthful of blood stuck in his throat. He could neither swallow nor spit out. The Yi family had a 100-man array and the help of their ancestors' oracles. Yixiang was an old monster who had lived for more than 1,000 years, a once-in-a-thousand-years genius in the Yi family. And Xiao Xian? What did he have? He was just a barbaric tribesman. Etuan felt stifled. But when he thought about how Xiao Xian's transformation could cause trouble for Yixiang and create an opportunity for them to retreat, Etuan felt much better. But why did he see that huge figure with white runes charging toward them? Chapter 801. The flame body was sturdy and solid, as if it was a real person. The crimson flame giant seemed to have broken free of its chains and mud. It stepped for light, free, carefree. The giant's steps quickened from walking to running. The roaring of the flames on his body was like the roars of thousands of ferocious beasts. Each of them was roaring and roaring, and when they gathered together, they emitted an earth-shattering pressure. Wind and fire swirled around the giant's body as it ran, flames as sharp as knives bursting outwards with each step. Etuan had thought that the tribesmen would attack Yixiang after his transformation. After all, Yixiang was the one who trapped them here. If they worked together, they would have a chance of breaking out of this boundary. However, no one expected the powerful Crimson Giant to change its path and charge towards the Yi family. The white pattern beneath the giant's feet kept the flames at bay. Etuan could see a figure at the giant's feet. The figure was almost one with the flames on the giant's body, but the color was darker and blurrier. Still, he could see a figure standing there. It was Xiao Xian, the one who created the flame giant. Other than Xiao Xian, there was another figure behind him, glowing with a white light that could not be ignored. It was almost the same size as Xiao Xian. No one knew what the white figure was, but everyone who saw it instinctively felt uneasy. The three silhouettes moved in unison, as if they were a single entity. Why is he running towards us? Someone in the Yi family's totemic formation asked in a trembling voice as he saw the approaching figure. I don't know. He's not going to fight us with Yixiang, is he? I knew that tribesman was with Yixiang. They're definitely working together. They had just been wondering what the white flame pattern was, but now they were too frightened to think about anything else. They stared straight at the Crimson Giant. Etuan and the other two thought that Xiao Xian had changed his mind at the last minute and was going to fight them with Yixiang. If that was the case, they would have no chance of escaping. Yixiang alone was troublesome enough. With the addition of this strange tribesman, they were in a dire situation. They might even be wiped out. However, as the flame giant got closer and closer, they noticed that the flame giant wasn't charging towards them, but towards the enormous tortoise that was blocking the wall of flames. The giant tortoise. The tribesman's target was the giant tortoise. What's he doing? Was he really going to fight them with Yixiang? Without the protection of the giant tortoise, the flame wall would come straight for them. Even with the protection of the totem array, they might not be able to survive under the pressure of the flame wall. However, in next to no time, all their surprise, bewilderment, and anxiousness were tossed to the back of their minds. Because they saw a scene that caused their scalps to go numb, and they were astounded to the point they were unable to make a sound. It was as if someone had choked their throats, and a coldness that caused their entire bodies to be on the verge of being frozen arose within them. They saw the flame giant grab the giant tortoise's tail, which was almost as long as its shell, and drag it away from the wall of fire. The tortoise's claws, which had been blocking the wall of fire, shot out sparks as they left the wall. Ignoring the approaching wall of flames and the surging waves of orange-red flames, the flame giant grabbed the tortoise's tail with its two large hands and pulled it back. The flames that kept surging out of the barrier at the bottom were pulled back by the giant tortoise, as if they were pushed against the waves of the sea. Even though the giant tortoise was only made of flames, it was as heavy as a mountain. Every step the giant took caused the ground to tremble even more violently. His originally brisk steps became heavy once again. Xiao Xian could feel the bones in his body making cracking sounds. It was as if his entire body was once again in an overloaded state. All of his strength was unleashed without reservation. The immense pain from overloading his body gave Xiao Xian an indescribable sense of pleasure. Every ball of fire on the giant's body seemed to become a part of Xiao Xian. He was only standing at the giant's feet. When he looked at the tortoise and the wall of fire, he struggled to lift his head. But now, Xiao Xian no longer felt that way. He looked at Yi Tuan and the others at the same level. The giant's gaze was his gaze. The giant's hand was his hand. Flame spewed out of the flame giant's body like burning blood. Xiao Xian felt like he was on an ancient battlefield, fighting with all his might. Live or die. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight. The giant's flaming arms dragged the tortoise's long tail. It roared as if it wanted to tear apart the world of fire. The rising flames seemed to be cheering it on. Under the flames, Xiao Xian felt a strange emotion brewing in him, ready to burst out at any moment. Xiao Xian felt like this was the fiercest eruption he had ever unleashed since he came to this world. It was also the most complete fusion with the strange white power. The giant tortoise's four palms left the ground. Its enormous body was forcefully lifted into the air. Everyone who saw this scene fell into a daze. This was Yituan's first time witnessing and experiencing Yinjiao's brutality. Yituan had a vague guess as to what the flame giant wanted to do. Stop! Stop! Yituan wanted to roar, but he found that he could not. All his composure was gone. The giant did not seem to be wielding a giant tortoise, but a giant meteor hammer. It easily dispersed the torrents of orange flames coming from Yixiang's fiery wall. The scattered flames howled like beasts caught in a hurricane. The crimson flames around the giant continued to rise, bursting with even more power. The crisscrossing gong pattern under its feet grew brighter. As the giant tortoise was spun faster and faster, the giant's arms that were holding onto the tortoise's tail swelled once again. Dozens of streams of flame burst forth from the tortoise's body, as if it could not suppress the blood that was spurting out. However, the movements of the giant's arms did not slow down, and the hands that were holding onto the tortoise's tail did not relax. When the strength reached a peak, the tortoise's spinning motion changed. Turn leg, turn body, smash. He swung his arms fiercely, propelling his tortoise body. The tortoise's back smashed down fiercely like a meteor hammer. In that instant, when the power reached its peak, the flame giant's figure blurred, including Xiao Xian's and the white figure behind Xiao Xian. The blurry silhouette was like a bonfire blown by the wind, about to disappear in the next moment. However, it felt completely different. The three figures merged into one. A heroic howl seemed to pierce through time and space, drowning out the sound of the wind and fire, drowning out the giant tortoise's angry roar, drowning out everything. Yituan felt as if he was looking at the soul of a flame that had burned for billions of years. Boom! It was as if countless thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The deafening boom made everyone lose their sense of hearing. Their nerves were numb from the shock. No one could remain unaffected by this. Even the Yi family's totemic formation was shaken to the point of dispersing. Even with the protection of the Yi family's totemic formation, the totemic formation was also shaken to the point that it looked like it was going to collapse at any moment. The torrent of flames that rushed over were all dispersed in an instant, and the exploding flames filled every corner of the enchantment. The flames that formed the array beneath everyone's feet were thrown high into the air. Countless curtains of fire, accompanied by fireballs of various sizes, rushed upwards like meteors. They were frail figures trapped in the curtains of fire and meteors, so minuscule that they could be easily dispersed. It was as if the entire world was being turned upside down. The sealed enchantment, under the huge impact and vibration, revealed the dark background below. If one looked down from above, they would see many black cracks on the enchantment below. They were like black lightning that appeared in the fire, constantly twisting and changing shape in the vibration. Ituan looked at the array beneath his feet, at the black cracks that looked like twisting pythons. His mind, which had been in deep thought, went blank for a moment. His voice trembled. It's broken. However, no one could hear him now. Everyone was under the immense pressure of the world being turned upside down. The E family's biggest pillar of support, the totem formation guarded by 100 people, was like a fire seed. The orange-red flame at the core of the totem formation was like a candle flickering in the wind. No one knew how long it could last. However, in this world of fire, the huge, crisscrossing duplex character pattern formed by white flames was like a mark deeply engraved on a hard rock. No matter how the fire hit it, no matter how the surroundings shook, it still maintained the clear shape of the pattern, as if nothing in this world could change it. Chapter 802. In the heavily guarded courtyard of the E family's mansion, the tense atmosphere grew heavier. Those who could not keep their cool paced in circles anxiously, not daring to make a sound lest they disturb the people in the courtyard. The broken bone in front of Ituan had already made their hearts sink. When no second bone broke, they heaved a sigh of relief. However, they waited and waited. Days passed. Although the courtyard was undisturbed by the totem, many could no longer maintain their composure. It was not physical torture, but psychological pressure. Some wanted to wait, but the waiting only made them extremely haggard. Their footsteps were light, as if they had not eaten or slept well for days. There were many such people. Some even fainted while waiting. The mental and psychological pressure was unbearable even if they did not do anything physically taxing. Moreover, this had been going on for a long time. It's good news that there's no movement, someone thought. At the very least, there were no signs of broken bones or broken stones. It seemed that the situation over there was still stable. Nothing must happen. Otherwise, the E family will be in trouble. The people around the E family were anxious. Ever since the E family closed their doors, there had been a constant stream of people coming to investigate. Some were from the other 5 tribes in the royal city, while others were from other places. Although they seemed to be worried for the E family, they had ill intentions. If the E family was in danger, they would take advantage of the situation. Friendship? In the face of benefits, the 6 tribes in the royal city never cared about friendship. If any of the other tribes were in danger, the E family would also intervene. Therefore, as fortune tellers, they knew better than anyone what the consequences would be. On this day, after a short rest, they returned to the courtyard. Go back and rest. We'll keep watch, the leader said to the people in front. Now, there were 2 groups of people taking turns to guard and rest. In front of them was a man sitting on a leather cushion near Ituan. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his eyes were lifeless. His hair was messy, and his clothes were stained with mud. This would never have happened in the past, but now, everyone was used to it, and no one cared. Just as the 2 groups were about to switch, the person who got up from the beast hide massaged his numb and stiff legs. He was about to say something when he shuddered and looked at Ituan's group. In the courtyard, the tortoise shell in Ituan's hand glowed brightly. The bone pieces in the shell jumped rapidly. Everyone stared at the tortoise shell in disbelief. Naturally, they knew what the changes to the tortoise shell meant. He even used the oracle bone artifact left behind by his ancestors. Is Yi Xiong really that powerful? I wonder how the battle is going. Many people whispered. No matter how much they tried to comfort others, There was only one thought in their minds: danger. Yituan was forced to use his ancestors' oracle bone artifact. What kind of dire situation was that? Seeing this, the people who were supposed to take turns to rest did not leave. They returned to guard the courtyard. How could they be in the mood to eat at a time like this? They would not be able to sleep even if they went back. Just like that, the days passed. The people in the courtyard grew more haggard. The guards outside the mansion also grew restless. Everyone was panicking, and some were already having other thoughts. After a period of time, the weather gradually became hotter. The people who were guarding the courtyard, although they were sweating profusely due to their anxiety, felt waves of coldness from their bones. Something was wrong. Something seemed to be suppressing the totem formation again. It felt like it could not hold on any longer. Suddenly, the totem in the courtyard grew brighter. The energy waves from the totem became more obvious and unstable, as if a hammer was pounding on it. What's wrong? What's going on? They did not know what was going on and could only worry. Not long after, they heard a crisp crack sound. The sound was not loud, but it was as if their nerves had been snapped. The people in the courtyard stared at the tortoise shell in Yituan's hand, their eyeballs about to fall out. Their faces were pale, large beads of sweat rolling down their foreheads. They did not even bother to wipe it off, petrified as they stared at the tortoise shell. Impossible. Impossible. The person closest to Yituan stared at the tortoise shell, his lips trembling as he spoke with a sharp, piercing voice. On the turtle shell in Yituan's hand, where even the Gongjia family's sharpest sword would not be able to leave a mark, there was now a crack in the shell. Soon, they did not have time to stare at the tortoise shell because the totem in the courtyard was flashing even more violently. It could not even maintain its shape. It was about to break the formation. Woo! The totem that almost covered the entire courtyard flashed rapidly before exploding. Sparks flew like meteors across the night sky and were extinguished. The people in the courtyard gasped. The person closest to Yituan strode forward to support Yituan. Before he could ask, Yituan spat out a mouthful of blood and roared, "That Yin Jiao." After that, Yituan's eyes rolled back and he fainted. The other two elders beside Yituan were not unconscious, but they were not much better off. Their faces were pale and they looked older than ever. They struggled to keep their eyes open and their withered bark-like hands trembled. If not for someone supporting them, they would not have been able to sit and would have fallen to the ground. Behind Yituan and the other two, in the 100-strong formation, many people had fainted with blood oozing out of their orifices. It was difficult to tell how badly they were injured, but everyone who saw this knew that they had lost this battle. They had lost terribly. The Yi family was in for a major upheaval. As for what Yituan said before he fainted, some people began to ponder. Wasn't he going to fight Yi Xiang? Why would Yituan mention Yin Jiao? And the first thing he said was Yin Jiao. He did not even mention Yi Xiang. Yin Jiao? Why would Yin Jiao be involved? The Yi family was in chaos. In the royal city, the other tribes who had been keeping an eye on the Yi family also heard the news and began to move. Far away from the royal city, on another continent, at the foot of a mountain range near Eagle Mountain, Xiao Xian suddenly opened his eyes and took a few deep breaths. The feeling of dizziness and exhaustion faded a little, but his muscles were still trembling. The feeling of overload was still there, and his clothes were all soaked in sweat. Cha-Cha heard the noise and hurried over to call out to him. I'm fine. Xiao Xian waved his hand weakly. Even raising his arm was difficult. After resting for a while, Xiao Xian felt that he had recovered some of his strength and slowly stood up. Only then did he realize that the place where he was originally sitting had a crisscrossing double-eye pattern. It looked like a mark left behind after the rocks on the ground had been melted. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian still couldn't understand why this happened. The rumbling of his stomach made Xiao Xian feel very hungry. He got up and walked toward the forest, planning to find something to eat first. After a few steps, Xiao Xian sensed movement from Yizong's side. He looked over and saw Yi Qi glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. "You!" Yi Qi pointed a trembling finger at Xiao Xian. He spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood and fainted. Chapter 803. Xiao Xian ignored Yi Qi and Yi Zong. They didn't seem to be in good condition, especially Yi Qi. He was severely injured and fainted after uttering only one word. The panicked slaves were trying to save him. Xiao Xian looked away. He was starving, and his vision was blurry after just a few steps. He forced himself to set up a trap. With his current strength, he couldn't take the initiative to hunt. While guarding the trap, Xiao Xian ate some of the meat Cha-Cha brought back. However, Cha-Cha ate raw meat, and Xiao Xian didn't have the time to light a fire to roast the meat, so he ate raw meat as well. When hunting in the tribe, they often encountered situations where it wasn't appropriate to light a fire. It wasn't rare to eat raw meat. While waiting for the prey, Xiao Xian noticed that something was wrong with the surroundings. He didn't notice it before, but after eating and resting, he noticed that the forest was strange. Xiao Xian remembered that it was already winter when he came here. Although the weather here didn't change much throughout the year, there were still changes in the trees. When Xiao Xian arrived, the trees had already borne fruit. Now, there were no traces of fruit on the trees. There were no rotten fruits on the ground either. Xiao Xian climbed to a high vantage point and looked into the distance. The strange feeling in his heart intensified. Xiao Xian suddenly felt a familiar aura approaching quickly. It was almost silent. Not long after, a figure appeared in the forest. Gan Xie. Xiao Xian looked at the person in surprise. Gan Xie was wearing a gray hemp cloak. Since it was daytime, he still wore a hood as usual. Xiao Xian didn't expect to see Gan Xie here. "Why are you here? I'm looking for you." Gan Xie looked around. His gaze lingered on Yi Zong and Yi Qi for a few seconds before he turned to Xiao Xian. "You've been gone for too long. The Yinjiao people are worried." "I was gone for a long time." Xiao Xian knew that the flow of time in that strange dark world was different from the flow of time in the real world, but he only thought that he had stayed there for 10 days at most. In a few days, there will be a full moon. Gan Xie didn't say how long he had been gone, but Xiao Xian knew that he had been gone for more than half a year. It was no wonder that the Yinjiao people were so anxious. They said they were going to investigate the movements of the royal city people who had entered the forest, but in the end, it took them more than half a year. Winter had long passed, and the rainy season had ended. Xiao Xian knew that Gan Xie wouldn't lie about this. They would know when they looked at the moon at night. He also believed Gan Xie's words. He had really left for more than half a year. No wonder the forest gave him such a strange feeling. Xiao Xian remembered that before he entered the world of darkness, winter had not yet passed. How could half a year have passed in the blink of an eye? To Xiao Xian, that battle had only been half a day, but in the real world, so much time had passed. It was hard to imagine that a battle that had taken more than half a year. "I haven't heard from you, so I came to take a look," Gan Xie said simply. "The others can't sense your exact location, but your shaman seems to be able to. She can't leave the tribe, so she can only point out a general direction for the search team." Gan Xie briefly told Xiao Xian why he was here. The Yinjiao tribe had discussed going into the forest to search for Xiao Xian, but Gan Xie volunteered that he could sense Xiao Xian's exact location, and they could search for him in the forest. Gan Xie didn't like traveling with others. When he joined the other tribes in the Flaming River Basin to hunt, he treated it like a game. The others were afraid of him, and he didn't want to travel with them. That was why when Yinjiao suggested sending a team to go with him, Gan Xie refused. That was indeed the case. It was much more convenient and relaxing for Gan Xie when he was alone compared to when he was with others. Xiao Xian studied Gan Xie and nodded. "Not bad. Your complexion is much rosier. Looks like you've been doing well in the forest." Gan Xie's pale complexion had regained some color, but it was still slightly rosier than a normal person's. Now, Xiao Xian noticed that Gan Xie's complexion was filled with vitality, and he didn't look sickly or pale. How much blood did he suck to have such a change? As for why Gan Xie was able to find Xiao Xian, it was mainly because of the power Xiao Xian used to revive him. That special power affected Gan Xie, allowing him to come back from the brink of death. It also allowed him to find Xiao Xian's location. With his immortal body, Gan Xie had an easier time in the forest compared to others. "Did everything go well? How's the tribe doing while I was gone?" Xiao Xian asked. Gan Xie thought about it and said, "It's going well." This was to tell Xiao Xian that his journey had been smooth. The Yinjiao tribe was doing well too. Xiao Xian didn't plan on getting too much information from Gan Xie. After all, Gan Xie was a man of few words, and he didn't seem to be interested in anything. However, just as Xiao Xian thought that Gan Xie would start to think about life again, Gan Xie spoke. "I met a bat, a big bat. It's half a step away from becoming a beast king. It should be the one you mentioned before." Gan Xie gestured with his hand to outline the bat size. "The one from a bat mountain?" Xiao Xian frowned. "That bat wasn't easy to deal with. Did you lose to it?" Gan Xie shook his head with a strange expression. "No." Gan Xie had met that bat when he was hunting for food. Both of them liked to hunt at night, and they both drank blood. Both of them seemed to have a natural instinct for which beast's blood tasted better. Their hunting targets were very similar as well, so it wasn't strange for them to meet. The strange thing was, how did Gan Xie escape from the bat claws? In response to Xiao Xian's confusion, Gan Xie told him what happened. Not only did Gan Xie not lose to the bat's claws, but he also got along well with the bat. The bat didn't attack Gan Xie. Instead, Gan Xie gave the bat some prey, and the bat accepted it. After that, the bat helped Gan Xie get rid of two beasts that were difficult to deal with. When Xiao Xian heard about this from Gan Xie, he was also quite surprised. "With your strength, how would you fare against the giant bat?" asked Xiao Xian. "No," Gan Xie said without hesitation. His immortal body didn't mean that he couldn't be killed. There were limits to his abilities. Even though he hadn't really fought against the bat, he knew the difference between them. He wasn't confident that he could win, but it has a familiar aura. "It's similar to mine," Gan Xie said as he looked at Xiao Xian. "Is that bat connected to you?" "Connected?" Xiao Xian thought for a moment and briefly told Gan Xie about his first encounter with the bat. He only left out the part about mining fire crystals. The fire crystal mine was a secret of the Yinjiao tribe. Only a few people in the Yinjiao tribe knew about it. After all, Gan Xie wasn't a Yinjiao. Xiao Xian wouldn't tell him about the fire crystals. Xiao Xian emphasized how the bat competed with the other bat candidates to become the leader of the bat swarm. Xiao Xian still remembered that he was holding onto the fire crystal. Without him noticing, the power of the fire crystal was absorbed by the bat that was still evolving. After that, the bat was the first to complete its transformation and killed all the other bat candidates. In the end, it became the leader of the bat swarm. Perhaps it was because it absorbed the power released by Xiao Xian's fire crystal during its evolution that the bat had a similar aura to the Yinjiao tribe. This was also the main reason why it didn't attack the Yinjiao tribe. Although the bat had a similar aura to the Yinjiao tribe, it had another aura that was different from the Yinjiao tribes. It was an aura that came from Xiao Xian's body. This aura was stronger than the Yinjiao's aura. Gan Xie was able to come back to life because Xiao Xian used another type of power. Therefore, to the bat, Gan Xie was more similar to it than the other Yinjiao tribesmen. They were more of the same kind and closer. After what happened in the strange dark world, Xiao Xian had a better understanding of the white power in his body. Gan Xie's situation must have something to do with it. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. "What are you looking at?" Xiao Xian turned his head and saw that Gan Xie seemed to be looking for something. "There's the smell of blood," said Gan Xie. "Blood? Oh, there are two people from the Yi family and their slaves over there." Xiao Xian pointed in the direction of Yi Zong and Yi Qi. "No, it's not them." Gan Xie shook his head. "I can smell their blood, but I'm not looking for their blood. Their blood definitely smells better than the other tribesmen's, but there's another type of blood here that smells even better." Gan Xie sniffed carefully and scanned his surroundings like a radar. Finally, he looked up. "It's there. It's coming from up there." Gan Xie's eyes flashed red, and his long fangs grew out of his mouth. He lifted his leg and was about to charge up the mountain. His entire body exuded a murderous aura. From the flaming river to here, Gan Xie must have seen blood everywhere he went. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a strong, murderous aura. Xiao Xian hurriedly stopped Gan Xie. "Don't be rash. Keep your fangs and your murderous aura. This is the territory of the giant mountain eagles. Don't move around carelessly. Be careful. As for what's up there, Xiao Xian thought for a moment. Let me eat something first. After I recover, I'll go up with you. Gan Xie retracted his gaze and paused. Then he nodded. All right, he could feel a strong aura around here. It wasn't the aura of a living creature, but it made him nervous. If it wasn't for the murderous aura, he wouldn't have wanted to stay here. However, the smell from the mountain excited him and made him willing to take the risk. What was at the top of the mountain? Xiao Xian wondered. There weren't many beasts in this long mountain range. The higher up they went, the fewer animals there were. Besides the giant mountain eagles that came from afar, there was nothing else. No, there were exceptions up there. Those white worms. Xiao Xian remembered the white worms that broke out of the ground and ran up the mountain. He turned to Cha-Cha and asked, Did those white worms come down? Cha-Cha looked at the top of the mountain and then at Xiao Xian. He shook his head. They didn't come down. There were so many white worms up there, but they didn't come down. Xiao Xian thought back to the first time he came here. Back then, the white worms would steal the ice crystals on the top of the mountain. Then, they would transform in their nests and turn into butterflies. Moreover, it was almost a full moon now. Xiao Xian saw the white worms that turned into butterflies at this time, too. Xiao Xian still remembered what the white worms looked like when they turned into butterflies. The blood that Cha-Cha mentioned was most likely the white worms. If it was the giant mountain eagles, Gan Xie wouldn't be this excited even after knowing Cha-Cha for so long. Whether it was the white worms or something else on the mountain, Xiao Xian decided that he would go up and take a look when he recovered. He still remembered why Yizong and the rest were here. Xiao Xian also wanted to know if the white worms had any other secrets. Perhaps they had something to do with forging? It was rare for him to come here. He wouldn't be satisfied if he didn't find out. While Xiao Xian stared at the mountain and planned his next move, a tense atmosphere hung in the desert. It had been like this for half a year, and the cause was the change in the desert's ruler, Rock Hill City. Shu and his men looked nervously at a sand dune in the distance. There was an underground palace at the bottom of the dune. Yixiang was in there. Shu knew what Yixiang was doing. He knew that Yixiang would be in there for a long time, but he didn't expect it to be this long. Although Shu had confidence in Yixiang, the longer this went on, the more he felt a sense of foreboding. The Yi family was nothing to worry about. If Yixiang was here, it wouldn't take this long. What was going on? Shu had been thinking about it for the past few days. Now, he knew that his hunch was right. There was a loud boom, as if a giant beast was crashing into the ground. Sand flowed down the dune in front of them like water. The entire dune caved in with the boom, and the ground shook. The place where the underground palace was built was relatively sturdy, but now it seemed to have turned into quicksand, swallowing the entire dune. Retreat! Shu shouted for the team to retreat quickly because the scope of the quicksand was rapidly expanding. Boom! 2 silhouettes rushed out of the sunken area, creating a large hole. Then, 3 more silhouettes rushed out one after another. The 3 figures that rushed out from behind gathered together to protect the person in the middle. The 5 figures that appeared were the puppets that Yixiang had placed in the underground palace. Shu had seen them before when he entered the underground palace. His attention was not on the 5 puppets, but on the figure they were protecting. Yixiang, who was being protected from the underground palace, didn't look well. There was blood at the corner of his mouth, and the wooden bracelet in his hand was broken. How could this be? Shu was shocked. Due to Yixiang's injuries, Rock Hill City had to temporarily abandon some of its expansion plans. It didn't even care about the war at the coastline. The desert entered a period of relative peace. Chapter 804. Xiao Xian used 2 days to recover his strength. With his recovery speed, 2 days was considered very slow if he didn't suffer any serious internal or external injuries. In the past, he only needed a night's rest to regain his energy when he hunted, but this time he was too exhausted. He couldn't recover in 1 night. Plus, they had to be well prepared to go to the top of the mountain to search for answers. If they couldn't keep up, it would be too late for regrets. In these 2 days, Gan Xie wasn't interested in anything else. He only asked Xiao Xian about Yixiang. After learning that Yi Xiong was indeed very strong, Gan Xie stopped asking and stared at the top of the mountain all day long. No one knew what he was thinking. Yi Zong and Yi Qi were still heavily injured and couldn't walk. Yi Qi especially didn't wake up after he fainted. The slaves were so worried that they cried all day long. "Let's go." Xiao Xian jumped onto the eagle's back and patted Cha-Cha's back gently. Gan Xie was also on Cha-Cha's back. Cha-Cha reluctantly chirped before flying up. Cha-Cha rested a few times while carrying 2 people on his back. The higher they went, the thinner the air and the lower the temperature. The invisible pressure also became stronger. Gan Xie didn't like places that were too cold. The people of the Han tribe had always lived in hot deserts. Although their living habits had changed a lot after they became like this, he was still the same. Places full of ice and snow would restrict his movements. He didn't like this kind of environment at all. However, for the alluring smell of blood, Gan Xie was willing to take the risk. The higher they went, the fainter Gan Xie's breath became. He tried to minimize his presence. Firstly, the pressure from above made him nervous. Secondly, he wasn't used to the cold. He felt like a hibernating beast. Breathing wasn't necessary for him to begin with. Now that he stopped breathing, he looked like a stone statue, motionless on the eagle's back. After passing through layers of clouds, the water vapor in the air turned into ice particles and hit their faces. A layer of white appeared on their hair and clothes. "Wait, go over there." Xiao Xian pointed in a direction and motioned for Cha-Cha to fly over. After finding a suitable landing point, Xiao Xian jumped down from the eagle's back and stood on a protruding rock. He pushed aside the thick layer of snow on the rock and dragged out a white worm skin. The white worm skin was the same color as the snow. At first glance, it was impossible to tell the difference. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian using his special vision, he wouldn't have been able to find it. When Xiao Xian first came here, he also picked up a few white worm skins to make protective clothing. White worm skins had good defensive properties and could be used in a fight. At the same time, there was something else that the Yin Jiao people value the most. It could protect them from the core seed. When Xiao Xian first came to Eagle Mountain, most of the white worm skins he brought back were already damaged. There weren't many of them to begin with. Every time they entered the cave, where the core seed was stored, only a limited number of people could enter. The tribe had also discussed what to use as a replacement for the white worm skins. After all, it wasn't easy to come to Eagle Mountain, and they might not be able to find white worm skins. It would be great if they could find a replacement. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to find a suitable replacement. Now, Xiao Xian could bring back more worm skins. Xiao Xian touched the worm skins in his hands. He didn't know when the worms had thrown them down, but Xiao Xian guessed that it shouldn't have been too long ago. Xiao Xian rolled up the worm's skin and tied it to his belt. He looked around and found a second worm skin nearby. He rolled it up and brought it along with him. He couldn't find a third worm skin within his field of vision. Xiao Xian did not search further. The most important thing now was to see if the worms above had any other secrets. He would search for the other worm skins after he was done with his urgent matters. After a short rest, Cha-Cha flew up again. Xiao Xian could feel that Cha-Cha was facing a lot of resistance, but Cha-Cha was happy to fly like this. Even though it wasn't going to enter Eagle Mountain this time, it was still excited to fly like this in a place like this. As it flew up, it raised its head. It was rare for it to be expressionless, but its eyes flashed with a red light. "We're close." They were getting closer and closer to the peak. "Over there." Gan Xie pointed in a direction. Xiao Xian gestured for Cha-Cha to fly over. They weren't at the peak yet, but he knew that even though the worms dared to steal from the giant mountain eagle's territory, they wouldn't dare to build their nests on the icy plains. They would keep a safe distance from the peak, so they didn't need to continue flying up to find the worms. Xiao Xian saw a worm nest on the mountain. It was the same as the one he saw the first time he came here. The worm nest was made from worm silk. "They're changing." Xiao Xian looked at the hive. Because he had experienced it once, he knew very well that the white worm no longer left the hive. Instead, it stayed inside, quietly evolving. "It's a full moon tonight." Xiao Xian looked at the sky. The sun hadn't set yet, so the surroundings were still bright. Gan Xie jumped down from the eagle's back. Perhaps it was because of the low temperature. His movements were a little stiff and not as smooth as usual. The surrounding environment and the thick layer of snow made Gon Chia very uncomfortable. However, the worm blood helped him endure the discomfort. To Xiao Xian's surprise, Gon Chia stopped after taking a few steps towards the worm nest. "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Xiao Xian asked. "No." Gon Chia stared at the worm nest. "What did you find? You're not going to do anything?" Xiao Xian asked again. "It's not time yet." Gon Chia stood in the same spot, staring at the worm nest. "It's not time yet." Xiao Xian didn't understand why Gon Chia said that. However, he was sure that what attracted Gon Chia was the white worms. Since it wasn't time yet, he would wait. Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha went up the mountain to eat some ice. Xiao Xian hadn't eaten the ice pillars in a long time and missed them. There were no giant mountain eagles on the mountain, so Xiao Xian didn't have a hide. Gon Chia didn't like the ice, so he didn't eat much. He only had eyes for the white worms that were still changing. As time passed, the sun gradually set. However, the sky didn't turn dark. 2 moons that had mostly overlapped appeared in the night sky. Gon Chia became more and more excited. His hands trembled and his eyes turned red. That night, under the overlapping moons, everything was as bright as day. Every year, when the 2 moons coincided, both the human tribes and the beasts in the forest would be affected. For the beasts that were more seriously affected by the moonlight, this night of the year was also the night they were most afraid of. However, there were no other beasts near the top of the mountain. Faint roars of beasts could be heard from afar. Even though they were near the top of the mountain and far from the ground, they could still hear the roars. One could imagine how loud the roars would be if they were on the ground. Tonight, the beasts would be especially excited. He wondered if Yi Zong and Yi Qi at the foot of the mountain would be able to avoid them. Creak, creak, a soft sound could be heard. Xiao Xian stopped thinking about other things and looked towards the worm nest. Just like last year, Xiao Xian saw a white worm that looked like a butterfly without wings. It had 2 antennae on its head. The soft sound was the sound it made when it crawled out of the nest and on the snow. Xiao Xian looked at Gon Chia. Although Gon Chia was very excited, he did not move. If not for the red light in his eyes, he would still look like a statue. His presence was very weak. After the white insect crawled out of the nest, it headed towards a protruding rock. With a flash of white light, 2 long wings began to grow on both sides of the insect's body. Compared to the 2 outstretched wings, the insect's body was much smaller. The 2 wings were completely formed. As they flapped, there was a white fluorescence. The wings were like the many butterflies in the forest. After a slight pause, they flapped fiercely and left the snowy ground, flying into the distance. Star butterflies. This was the name that the people from the royal city mentioned. The night of the full moon was the only starlight under the bright sky. In the night sky, the 2 moons had completely overlapped. The world under the sky was as bright as day. Under such a sky, some white spots were not overshadowed by the moonlight at all. They flew up from the mountain. Those were the star butterflies from other parts of the mountain. The white worms that crawled up from the foot of the mountain had completed their transformation. Tonight, they all turned into star butterflies. The wind at the top of the mountain was very fierce. It was like a knife cutting across people's faces. Countless snowflakes were swept up and blown away. However, those flying star butterflies ignored the fierce cold wind and continued to fly higher and further. No one knew where they would fly to in the end. The first time he came here, Xiao Xian stared at the star butterflies for a long time. However, this time, he only shifted his attention after the star butterflies flew up. Gon Chia entered the worm's nest first. When Xiao Xian went over, he saw Gon Chia squatting on the ground. There was a puddle of something that looked like ice water where the white worm had been. Gon Chia stretched out a finger and drew on the puddle of ice water. Then he put the finger that was soaked in the ice water into his mouth. "This is it." Gon Chia's low voice was filled with excitement. "This is it? This ice water?" Looking at the puddle of ice water, Xiao Xian remembered the first time he came here. He had wondered where the shell of the pupa went when the white worms were transforming. At that time, Xiao Xian didn't see it. He thought that the star butterflies didn't have pupa shells when they were transforming. Now, it seemed that the pupa shells had disappeared when Xiaoxian came here. The ice in the puddle of ice water could be the pupa shells. Moreover, the ice was melting quickly and the water was evaporating. Without thinking too much, Xiaoxian took out a piece of worm skin and tied a simple, not to make a simple leather bag. He didn't have a bag that could hold liquids, so he could only use worm skin. Moreover, since it was from the star butterflies, it would be safer to use worm skin to store it. Regardless of whether it was related to forging or not, he would collect it first. Anything that caught Ganqia's attention was definitely not ordinary. Plus, the white worm had too many secrets. The worm skin and silk were all very useful. The bloodstains that Ganqia found mysterious would definitely be a surprise to him. Are you in a hurry to drink it? If not, help me. Xiaoxian handed Ganqia a bag made of worm skin. Ganqia didn't say anything. He took the bag and left to look for the next nest. He didn't have Xiaoxian's special vision, but he could accurately find the next nest with his sense of smell. Since he had found his target, he wasn't in a hurry to consume it. Just like Xiaoxian said, he should collect as much as he could. He was in a hurry, so he had to collect as much as he could. After collecting the ice water into the bag and tightening the opening, Xiaoxian realized that the ice water in the bag had stopped melting. This was exactly what Xiaoxian wanted. He let out a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the ice water would continue to melt and vaporize in the bag. In the end, there would be nothing left in the bag. Xiaoxian and Ganqia split up and collected the ice water that hadn't melted from the nest into the bag. If it had completely melted, they would collect the water. If it had completely evaporated, then there was nothing they could do. Cha-Cha also helped to look for nests. Once it found one, it called out for Xiaoxian to come over. Although Xiaoxian and Ganqia were fast, they couldn't find all the nests. After going through 10 nests, they only found a small puddle of water. After a few more nests, there was nothing left. Xiaoxian couldn't do anything about this. Luckily, he had already collected the ice water from 10 nests. After tightening the opening of the bag, Xiaoxian put the bag aside and asked Cha-Cha to guard it. He then went to collect the worm silk from the nests. If he didn't collect it in time, the worm silk would slowly fall off the rocks and be blown away by the wind. The worm silk used to make nests was stuck tightly to the rocks. However, as long as he poured in his totemic power, he could easily pull the worm silk off the rocks. Xiaoxian had done this before, so it was easy for him to do it now. The worm silk was very light, much lighter than the worm skin. Moreover, it had many uses. Xiaoxian had already used up all the worm silk he collected. Now was the time to collect some more. It would be useful for setting up traps and hunting in the future. Ganqia didn't know why Xiaoxian collected the worm silk, but he still helped. After all, if it wasn't for Xiaoxian bringing him up the mountain, it would have been difficult for him to climb the mountain alone. The environment on the mountain severely restricted his movements. He was only able to obtain the mysterious worm blood this time because of Xiaoxian's help. Therefore, if Xiaoxian wanted to collect worm skin and worm silk, of course he would help. The worm silk was fine. It was light and easy to carry. However, the worm skin was too heavy and difficult to find. The white worms liked to kick the skin down the mountain. This time, Xiaoxian found close to 20 before he stopped and continued his search. With the mysterious ice water, as well as the worm silk and worm skin, Xiaoxian went down the mountain. He was already very satisfied with the harvest from this trip. Chapter 805. It took a lot of time to collect the worm skin and worm silk. By the time they reached the foot of the mountain, the sun had already risen. The most violent period of the wild beasts in the forest had passed. After landing, Xiaoxian first looked for a place to place the things they brought down from the mountain. He sensed his surroundings. The two members of the Yi family didn't move. They didn't seem to have changed since Xiaoxian went up the mountain. However, Ichi was already awake. The two of them seemed to be discussing something. They were arguing in a low voice, accompanied by some coughing. Although Ichi was awake, he didn't seem to be in a good condition. Xiaoxian could guess Ichi's condition from the sounds, so he wasn't in a hurry to check on him. Gan Xie was anxious. After landing, the temperature around them warmed up. The pressure from the mountain was also greatly reduced. Gan Xie felt much better. Of course, what excited him the most was the liquid he collected from the worm skin bag. This should be something like a pupa shell. It's just that it's different from a normal pupa shell, said Xiao Xian. It's blood. From Gan Xie's point of view, the ice water gave him the impression that it was blood. This was because he wasn't interested in anything else other than blood. The only thing that could make him so excited was blood. Since he had the worm blood, he naturally wanted to taste it. Gan Xie opened up a small opening in the wormskin bag and poured the liquid out into his mouth. Gan Xie drank 2 big gulps of the liquid. He then tied the wormskin bag around his neck and passed it to Xiao Xian. After drinking 2 mouthfuls of worm blood, Gan Xie's face was frighteningly pale. The redness from drinking the blood of many wild beasts in the forest had completely disappeared. Gan Xie's usually expressionless face twitched rapidly. His hand that was holding the worm skin bag was also trembling as if he was trying to suppress a great pain. Xiao Xian took the worm skin bag. Without asking any questions, Gan Xie left the place and dashed into the forest like a gust of wind. Xiao Xian looked at the disappearing figure and looked at the bag that Gan Xie handed to him. Although Gan Xie only drank 2 mouthfuls, each mouthful was more than a normal person's mouthful. The 2 mouthfuls had reduced the liquid in the bag by 1/3. This was the result of collecting more than 10 hives. Are you sure you're all right after drinking so much? Xiao Xian whispered. He did not dare to try it. He could feel that the liquid was not suitable for drinking. If he drank it casually, it would harm his body, just like the blood of the green-faced fanged beast. The shell that could protect the larvae might not be able to protect humans. It might even be more destructive than the green-faced fanged beast blood. This knowledge grew stronger as he collected the mysterious liquid. He no longer dared to treat it as normal beast blood. Initially, he wanted to tell Gan Xie his opinion. However, when he turned around, he saw that Gan Xie had drunk it. He didn't know how he was doing now. Xiao Xian asked Cha-Cha to follow him. However, Cha-Cha flew 1 round and quickly returned. Gan Xie's location was quite far from the foot of the mountain. There were more fearsome beasts there. Moreover, during the past full moon, many of the beasts were still in their berserk state. However, the strange thing was that the beasts that seemed to have gone berserk did not approach Gan Xie's location. Many of them even took a detour. Even Cha-Cha did not want to stay there and observe. After a while, a sharp whistle was heard. A strong, murderous aura exploded. The wind blew, and the dense foliage in the forest was severely deformed. The strong wind was like a dancing blade. The whistling sound was chilling and murderous. There were some ferocious beasts in the forest. They were originally looking for prey and were planning to launch a surprise attack. However, under this sharp whistle, they were frightened by the sudden appearance of the fierce, murderous aura. They quickly turned around and fled into the bushes further away. After the sharp whistle, a few beasts wailed. The wind was filled with the smell of blood. The startled flock of birds quickly flew away, and the herd of beasts also retreated. In just a moment, the forest, which was originally violent because of the full moon, suddenly became quiet. Only the smell of blood and slaughter was left in the wind, as if there was a dangerous demon hidden in the forest. The feathers on Cha-Cha's neck stood up. It immediately flew into the sky. When it felt that it was not safe, it would fly high. This was a kind of instinct. The 8 slaves who were guarding Yizong and his companion were also on guard. They looked around nervously. 2 of them had the same bloodline as EC's green mantis. The spines on their backs were sticking out because of fear and panic. What happened? This was what everyone was thinking. Xiao Xian could tell that the smell was Gan Xie's. However, the smell of blood was mixed with the smell of beast blood. It was definitely not the smell of small number of beasts. With such a strong smell of blood, at least 10 beasts had been killed. Why did Gan Xie suddenly kill so many beasts? Did he replenish his food supply? That couldn't be right. If he only wanted to eat, he wouldn't have killed so many beasts. So, was it because of the bug blood? Just as Xiao Xian was about to go over to take a look the wind gradually stopped. The pungent smell of blood also gradually dissipated. Actually, it wasn't that the smell of blood had dissipated. It was just that the wind had weakened. The smell of blood was no longer carried in this direction. After a while, Xiao Xian sensed that Gan Xie was coming over. He stopped and looked over. Not long after, Gan Xie walked out of the forest. His cloak was messy, and there was a large amount of beast blood splattered on it. He looked like he had just crawled out of a battlefield. His footsteps were heavy. He looked like he was injured. As Gan Xie walked over, the murderous aura on his body gradually disappeared. When he looked over at Xiao Xian, his eyes were still red. However, because he had retracted his aura, the murderous aura had faded. "What's wrong?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's nothing. It's just a small change," Gan Xie replied. Xiao Xian looked at Gan Xie carefully. Although Gan Xie looked a little tired, the sickly paleness was gone. In fact, he looked more like a normal person. The red light in his eyes had completely disappeared. If one didn't look at the fresh blood on his body, he looked no different from a normal person. However, Xiao Xian felt that Gan Xie had changed a lot. This change was probably positive for Gan Xie. Otherwise, Gan Xie wouldn't be so obsessed with the mysterious bug blood. "Do you still want a drink?" Xiao Xian handed over the bag of bug skin that Gan Xie drank from. When they went down a mountain, they had agreed that Yin Jiao would take a third of the liquid that Gan Xie collected. Therefore, there was still a third of the liquid left for Gan Xie to drink. Gan Xie didn't say anything. After taking the bag, he drank another mouthful. However, this mouthful was much smaller than the first two mouthfuls. He wasn't in a rush either. It seemed like he was just casually tasting the liquid. After drinking, Gan Xie paused for a moment. Then, he handed the bag of bug skin back to Xiao Xian. "You can have the rest. You're not drinking anymore?" Xiao Xian looked at Gan Xie in shock. He couldn't believe that Gan Xie could walk out of the forest alive after drinking the liquid. While he was waiting, he had already dipped his finger in a little bit of the liquid. He also knew that the liquid was something that Yin Jiao people couldn't use. However, Gan Xie was an anomaly. He could handle things that other people couldn't handle. These things might be the kind of things that you guessed would be extremely useful for forging. I can feel that it's similar to the green-faced fang blood from your tribe. Gan Xie explained in detail. Gan Xie was better at distinguishing blood than Xiao Xian. Since he said so, Xiao Xian's guess was much more likely to be correct. "Is that all?" Xiao Xian didn't argue. He kept the bag of bug skin and tied it properly. Mu Yao had brought the royal city people here to search for the bug blood that the Gongjia ancestors had mentioned. It was a pity that before Mu Yao could find it, they were attacked by a group of giant mountain eagles. They didn't know how Mu Yao was doing, but perhaps they could find out more from the Yi family. The team that came all the way here to search for bug blood had suffered great losses. They were nowhere to be found, and Xiao Xian had found them. According to Xiao Xian's plan, he wanted to bring Yi Zong and Yi Qi back to the tribe. He wanted to get more information from the Yi family. Perhaps they could tell him more about the use of bug blood. Unfortunately, one of them might not be able to hold on until then. Yi Qi's injuries were worse than Yi Zong's. Although the slaves had tried their best to save him, there was little effect. Yi Qi also had no intention of living. Not only that, he wanted to die here, because if he lived, Xiao Xian would bring him to the Yin Jiao tribe. Yi Qi didn't want to suffer such humiliation. Yi Qi hated Xiao Xian deeply. To him, Xiao Xian was just like Yi Xiong, a great threat to the Yi family. Even though they managed to escape from the broken boundary because of Xiao Xian, the scene of Xiao Xian smashing the giant tortoise into the boundary made Yi Qi choke. The sight of Xiao Xian made him want to vomit blood. When Xiao Xian arrived, Yi Qi was lying on the ground. Yi Zong was kneeling beside Yi Qi. 8 slaves stood guard around them. When he saw Xiao Xian, Yi Qi spat out another mouthful of blood. He glared at Xiao Xian and opened his mouth, but he still turned to look at Yi Zong. He raised his hand and grabbed Yi Zong's arm. His fingers were so tight that it looked like he wanted to break Yi Zong's arm. He stared at Yi Zong and said with all his strength, "You must do what you promised me. You must." Yi Zong nodded silently. Seeing this, Yi Qi roared towards the sky, using the last bit of strength he had left to vent the unwillingness in his heart. He was someone of high status in the Yi family and a respected master in the royal city. Who knew that he would end up like this? Yixiang's appearance was a huge blow to Yi Qi. He could still remember the helplessness and despair he felt when he faced Yixiang. Even though he was only one of 100 people in the formation and did not stand guard at the front like Yi Tuan and the rest, he still felt it strongly. Yi Qi knew very well what happened to the Yi family at the headquarters. That was why he could not accept it. He was even a little scared. He was worried that the Yi family's glory would end here, just like the tribes that disappeared with time. Yixiang aside, even this Yinjiao kid had dealt them such a huge blow. They even managed to escape from Yixiang's boundary only because of Xiaoxian. That sliver of hope in the midst of despair was created by the tribesmen he had always looked down on. It would be strange if he was happy. If Xiaoxian knew what Yi Qi was thinking, he would have scoffed. The Yi family was used to being arrogant, thinking that everyone was inferior to them. Xiaoxian ignored Yi Qi's resentment that Xiaoxian broke the Yi family's ancestral oracle and used the giant tortoise to break the boundary. Nonsense. If he did not borrow the tortoise shell, was he supposed to break the boundary with his bare hands? How painful would that be? How tiring would that be? It was already tiring enough to support the fire giant. Of course, he had to choose the most efficient way to get out of this predicament. What were the first two skills that had been passed down from their ancestors to the present day that were recognized by the tribesmen? One was fire, and the other was a tool. Only idiots would not use the tools they had. Thankfully, Xiaoxian did not know what Yi Qi was thinking and did not say it out loud. If Yi Qi heard Xiaoxian's reply, he would have spat out more blood before he died. Yi Qi breathed his last. The Yi family had a tradition of choosing their own graves and did not insist on being buried at the Yi family headquarters. Moreover, the royal city was not the ancestral land of the Yi family. In terms of feelings, the Yi family did not have as much attachment to the royal city as the Ji family. After all, the Ji family had many farms and valleys. The Yi family only needed to bring their own divination tools and did not have a strong sense of belonging to the royal city. When Yi Qi felt that he could not hold on for much longer, he had already negotiated with Yizong. 2 of his 4 slaves would be buried with him, while the other 2 would follow Yizong. Yizong found a place near the mountains to bury Yi Qi. Yizong did not need to do anything for the other 2 slaves buried with him. After digging the graves, they would end their own lives. The slaves brought here by Yizong and Yi Qi were all well trained. The mark of a slave was deeply imprinted in their minds. They would never betray their masters. Even if they had other ideas, they would carry them out. Xiaoxian did not interfere with the burial of Yi Qi. Yizong had talked to him about the terms. What surprised Xiaoxian was that Yi Qi would rather die than be captured by Xiaoxian and brought back to the Yinjiao tribe. Before his death, Yi Qi even made Yizong promise him that he would never let the Yinjiao bring his body back to the Yinjiao tribe. On the contrary, Yizong did not reject being taken back to the Yinjiao tribe as a captive at all. Xiaoxian was not sure whether this idea was true or not, but it was at least 70 to 80% credible. Yizong might have really been willing to be captured, but he did not say what other ideas he had behind this. However, he did promise Xiaoxian that he would not do anything harmful to the Yinjiao tribe. He swore on the totem of the Yi family. Regardless of whether it was true or not, after Yizong buried Yi Qi, Xiaoxian took Yizong and his 6 slaves away from the mountains and returned to the Yinjiao tribe. 20 worm skins, a large bundle of worm silk, and 2 small bags of mysterious ice water left behind by the star butterfly during its metamorphosis were also taken away. Chapter 806. Because he had to bring Yizong and 6 slaves, Xiaoxian's return was much slower. Fortunately, Yizong's 4 slaves and the 2 left behind by Yi Qi made the 6 slaves strong enough to not drag them down. Moreover, Yizong would occasionally perform divination to confirm which direction was the safest. Even if Yizong could not hold on, Xiaoxian could use a straw rope to perform divination to avoid unnecessary trouble. Xiaoxian did not fly on the eagle's back. He kept an eye on Yizong and obtained more information from Yizong on the way back. According to Yizong, The mysterious ice-like liquid they had collected was probably what the people of Royal City were looking for. According to the Gongjia family's ancestors' notes, the star butterfly's blood could be used to forge top-grade treasured swords. As for how it could be forged, Gongjiayu, who had come with them but had died under the eagle's claws, did not explain. Yizong really did not know. Xiao Xian also asked Yizong about the strange black world. Yizong was tight-lipped too, only telling Xiao Xian that it was a spiritual world that was connected to one's consciousness. If one was killed in that world, one would die even if there were no wounds on one's body. How could one live without a soul? From another perspective, it was equivalent to brain death. Yizong was very cooperative throughout the journey. Other than secrets that could not be revealed, he would answer as long as Xiao Xian asked. He even told Xiao Xian some secrets about the other tribes in Royal City. This surprised Xiao Xian. Based on Yizong's behavior, he felt like he was going to join Yinjiao and was trying to please them. This was Yizong, the prodigy of the Yi family's younger generation. As for Gan Xie, after drinking the worm's blood, his body had undergone a qualitative change. Xiao Xian had seen Gan Xie split a rock like it was tofu. His elongated finger bones were as sharp as knives. Yang Guang's fingers glowed with a metallic sheen. On the way back, he drank a little more worm's blood. It was just a tiny amount, and he stopped drinking it. In Gan Xie's words, only the first mouthful of the worm's blood was fresh. That was the only taste that excited him. After that, he lost interest in it. In fact, Gan Xie knew that drinking the fresh worm's blood next year might not help him. It had already brought about a qualitative change in him. No matter how much he drank in the future, there would be a limit to what he could change. However, it was still okay to drink a little of the insect's blood every year. After all, it was good for his body. A small change was still a change. Star butterflies should appear every year, right? Gan Xie thought that he might wait for this period of time to go to Eagle Mountain to look for the blood. However, when he thought about the environment there, he felt that it would be difficult. If you go there alone, you must be careful. Don't attack the giant mountain eagles. Xiao Xian reminded Gan Xie after understanding his thoughts. Gan Xie nodded. Of course, he knew that the giant mountain eagles were the ones guarding the area. The ancestors of the giant mountain eagles were probably the ones guarding the area. He could still remember the enormous pressure they gave off. If he couldn't go there alone, he would have to wait for Yinjiao's people. Once it was proven that the worm's blood was extremely helpful for forging, Yinjiao would definitely send people there in the future. When Xiao Xian returned to Yinjiao, he saw the Yinjiao hunting team at the hunting area. They stayed in the forest for a while before returning with the team. On the way back, Xiao Xian saw some people from smaller tribes. Judging from their hunting habits, they were clearly used to it. They weren't as timid and unfamiliar as they were when they first entered the forest. During the time that Xiao Xian was away, these people from smaller tribes had gradually integrated into the Flaming River Alliance. They had tasted the benefits and were motivated. Many tribes that used to starve no longer had to worry about food and clothing. They could even satisfy their little ambitions. Of course, the Yinjiao people were the happiest about Xiao Xian's return. During the time that Xiao Xian disappeared, the Yinjiao tribes were filled with worry. The people from smaller tribes who went into the forest with him knew that Xiao Xian had left, but they didn't know where he went. The Yinjiao people were tight-lipped, so they had no way of knowing. That was why there were all kinds of guesses in private. There were also people who were gloating over other people's misfortune. Some people even said that the Yinjiao Grand Elder might have been eaten by a wild beast in the forest. In the end, the Yinjiao warriors heard those words and beat them up. They even said that if they heard such words a second time, they would kill them on the spot. Yinjiao was now the leader of the Flaming River Alliance. If the smaller tribes wanted to survive in this alliance, they had to rely on Yinjiao. That was why, after being warned, the rumors about Yinjiao quickly disappeared. Even if they said it in private, they were very careful. They wouldn't let the Yinjiao people hear them. Even though there were no more suspicions, many people in Yinjiao were still anxious. From the chief to the warriors, they were all restless. The leaders' tempers were getting hotter and hotter. One wrong move, and they would explode. They were still suppressing their anger because Gui Zhe said that Xiao Xian was still alive. As a shaman, Gui Zhe could roughly sense Xiao Xian's location. He wasn't in danger. When they heard that Xiao Xian was back, the gloomy atmosphere in the Yinjiao tribe changed. It was as if they had reaped a great harvest. From the top of the mountain to the streets of the trading point, the atmosphere suddenly lightened up. A traveling team that had just arrived at the Flaming River trading point was walking around the trading point. When they saw the guard patrolling the streets, they were behaving strangely today. Their usual cold faces looked as if someone owed them 1,000 animal skins. But today, they were all grinning from ear to ear. "What's the good news in Yinjiao?" Someone in the team asked the people from the other teams in a low voice. "I heard that Yinjiao's Grand Elder is back." The person who answered let out a long sigh of relief. Before this, they didn't dare to mention Yinjiao's Grand Elder in the trading point. They were afraid that the Yinjiao people would beat them up if they said something wrong. In the worst case, they might even draw their swords. When Ao, who was overseeing the construction site, heard the news, he quickly stopped what he was doing and rushed back to the headquarters. When he saw the eagle in the sky, he was relieved. When he saw that Xiao Xian was unharmed, he finally relaxed. Although Gui Zhe had already gone out to search, Ao still brought some people to search in the direction that Gui Zhe had pointed out. However, they received news that something had happened at the trading point, so they rushed back to deal with it. "You're back. It's good that you're back. Haha, you're finally back. If you didn't come back soon, I would have thought that something had happened to you." Duo Kong strode over and gave Xiao Xian a bear hug. Then, he patted Xiao Xian's shoulder with all his might. Before this, he wouldn't have said this. When Duo Kong heard that something had happened to Xiao Xian, he would also act like the other Yinjiao people and beat the person who said this. However, now that Xiao Xian had returned safely, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. On the mountain, Gigu and Gui Zhe, as well as the 2 retired shamans, went down the mountain to welcome them. They were happy that Xiao Xian had returned safely. The tribe was where it was today because of Xiao Xian. However, after the initial excitement, they noticed that out of the 7 people that Xiao Xian had brought back, the other 6 were obviously slaves. The one in the middle was probably the target. "Is he the Yi family member you mentioned?" Gigu asked Xiao Xian. "Yes, Izong from the Yi family," Xiao Xian said. "Izong from the Yi family?" Zheng Luo, who had just arrived, glanced at them sharply. The 6 slaves guarding Izong immediately tensed up. The Yinjiao people around them were too hostile, and many of them were strong. If a fight really broke out, the 6 of them wouldn't be able to protect Izong. "Is there a problem with Izong from the Yi family?" "No, Izong from the Yi family. The Yi family member from the Royal City team that hunted us back then." Duo Kang's smile immediately faded when he heard that Xiao Xian had returned. He stared at Izong with a murderous glare that wasn't much weaker than Zheng Luo's. Duo Kong gritted his teeth when he thought about how they were hunted down when they migrated. If Xiao Xian hadn't brought them across the sea, it was hard to say how many of them would have survived. It was even possible that all of them would have been wiped out. When they migrated from the other side of the sea, they were hunted down by the Royal City team and other organizations. Although Izong wasn't the one who gave the orders, he was an accomplice and an enemy if he participated. They didn't believe that Izong didn't want to kill them back then. When he followed the team to hunt them down, did he think that this day would come? Duo Kong flexed his fingers, thinking about how to deal with this captive. But after some thought, he felt that something wasn't right. If Xiao Xian had brought him back alive, it definitely wasn't to kill him. Sure enough, Gigu only ordered people to bring Izong to a cave and lock him up with the slaves. He didn't immediately give the order to execute him. When they reached the top of the mountain, everyone else had left. Only a few of the most important people in the Yinjiao tribe were left in the stone house. "Xian, tell us what you think," Gigu said. There was no one else here, only the elders, the chief, the shaman, and the team leader. Xiao Xian told them about the incident. Xiao Xian didn't mention the mysterious power in his body. He emphasized that he had borrowed the power of his ancestors. This also explained why he had brought Izong back alive. Only Yizong was left in the royal city team. Xiao Xian wanted to know more from Yizong. One was about the dark world of the Yi family. Xiao Xian wanted to know more, but unfortunately, Yizong didn't say much. The second was about the bug blood. Did the bug blood have other secrets? Like casting? What? That bug blood can really make better weapons. Hearing Xiao Xian's explanation, Duo Kong couldn't sit still. It's just a guess. We still need to test it. Xiao Xian took out 2 bug skin bags. Test it. Test it. Test it today. Not only Duo Kong, but the others were also excited. The green-faced fanged beast blood had already given them the advantage of making better weapons. If it could make better weapons, of course they were excited. Wait, Xian, you haven't finished yet. What's the third one? Guizhe asked. Everyone was already excited by the bug blood. Hearing this, they suppressed their excitement and anticipation and looked at Xiao Xian, waiting for him to finish. The third one is also the one that has the most to do with Yinjiao. Xiao Xian paused and said, the reason why I brought Yizong back safely was because of the condition Yizong gave me. He said that he was willing to sacrifice the rest of his life to help Yinjiao expand. Our expansion of the trading point has nothing to do with Yizong. How can he help us? With those arms of his, could he lift stone or wood? Or will he let the slaves do the work? Duo Kong was dissatisfied. No, he can't. Guizhe and the 2 retired witches leaned forward. They understood Xiao Xian's words. Others might not understand, but as witches, they were very sensitive to certain things. What do you mean? Everyone in the room looked at Guizhe and the other 2 witches. Rumor has it that the Yi family can observe everything in the world. They can see the past and the future. Guizhe said. Gigu frowned, then his eyes widened. You mean he can point out the best places to build and what to avoid? That's right. The Yinjiao tribesmen have been frightened by all kinds of natural disasters. Back then, the Yinjiao tribe had to leave their homeland because of natural disasters and split up. Forget about Zheng Luo's branch. The Flaming River branch had lived in isolation from the rest of the world for almost 1,000 years. All their skills had almost been lost, and they had regressed to the lowest level. Even if they found a way to cross the river and return to the old haunt with great difficulty. They even welcomed the return of Zheng Luo's group and gathered the wanderers. But just as they were preparing to rise in the old haunt, another disaster struck. If they hadn't been prepared in advance, they might not have done better than their ancestors 1,000 years ago. If they could have known about the natural disasters beforehand, that would have been great. It had only been a few years, but they had already gone through several large-scale migrations. It was too much. The tribesmen respected and feared the heavens. Can the Yi family be trusted? Duo Kong was still doubtful. As the saying went, those who were not of the same tribe had different intentions. How could he trust someone who wasn't from their tribe? Not to mention someone from the Yi family. The Yi family can be trusted, Zheng Luo said. Since he swore on the Yi family totem, then Yizong should be a man of his word. If that's the case, then we can spare his life. Duo Kong didn't insist on taking Yizong's life. Their tribe was the most important thing. But the problem is, he doesn't want his own life, Xiao Xian said. What? Xiao Xian's words confused everyone in the room. If Yizong wasn't doing it for himself, who else could it be? He wants to trade a life for a life. As for whose life, he didn't mention it. He only said that he wanted to talk to us after our discussion. Xiao Xian repeated Yizong's words. Trade a life for a life? Who did he want to save? The Yinjiao people discussed at the top of the mountain for a long time before leaving. After Xiao Xian went down the mountain, he went to the trading point to check on the progress of the expansion. Because of Xiao Xian's disappearance, the expansion wasn't progressing very quickly. Hey, Xiao Xian. As soon as Xiao Xian went over, he was stopped by EC. EC had been waiting here. He couldn't go to the Yinjiao headquarters, so he waited here. I heard you brought back a few captives. Who did you catch? Chapter 807. When Xiao Xian brought Yizong and the others back to the tribe, they met the hunting party. Many people knew that Xiao Xian had brought back captives. It was not hard for EC to know this. However, EC usually did not stick his nose into other people's business. Now that he had come to look for Xiao Xian, he must have guessed something. Xiao Xian did not hide it. It's Yizong from your Yi family. Yizong. Him? EC did not look too surprised. He was more confused. He had already guessed the other party's identity from the descriptions of the hunting party. However, he was still puzzled when he heard Xiao Xian confirm it. It was possible that he was a peripheral member of the Yi family. However, based on EC's understanding of Yizong, based on his understanding of the Yi family, most people from the main branch would rather die than become captives, especially from these tribesmen. This was what puzzled him. Who was Yizong? He was the most outstanding person in their generation. EC had heard people say that if anyone in their generation could reach Yizong's level in the future, it would definitely be Yizong. To EC, who was also from the main branch, but was a loser, Yizong was what the elders call someone else's child. Because he knew how outstanding Yizong was, EC was still puzzled by Xiao Xian's confirmation. Can I meet Yizong? EC asked. Seeing Xiao Xian look over, EC hurriedly said, I promise I will never do anything to harm Yanjiao. After all, I've already left the Yi family. Xiao Xian looked at EC in silence for a moment, then nodded. All right. Xiao Xian was not in a hurry to check out the construction site anyway. He turned around and led EC over. Grasshopper, the half-beast human slave beside EC, also followed. EC looked at Grasshopper, then at Xiao Xian. Can I bring him along? Yes, Xiao Xian said. The Flaming Horn tribe's territory was very big. After they moved here from the old haunt, they expanded their territory. There were many small hills in the territory. Some of the hills were inhabited by wanderers, some were used for training or stone mining, and some were used to imprison people. Yizong and his 6 slaves were locked up in a cave on a small mountain. The prison door in the cave was made of bronze. Unless they could break through the cave, it would be very difficult for them to escape. When Yizong saw EC, his expression changed slightly. He was not surprised. Instead, he smiled. This made EC even more puzzled. Take your time. Xiao Xian led EC in, then closed the door and left the cave. After Xiao Xian left, EC looked at Yizong's situation. Yizong and his 6 slaves were not in the same cell. The other 6 slaves were in different cells. Therefore, there were only EC, Yizong, and EC in the same cell. You're here. Yizong's tone was calm. He looked at EC and then at Qing Fu. When Yizong's gaze swept over him, Qing Fu was so nervous that the thorns on his back almost popped out. His servile nature was engraved in his bones. He could not even straighten his back in front of the Yi family. He was especially nervous. Not to mention Yizong, who had a high status in the Yi family. It was said that the life of a slave was directly related to the slave master. When he was in the Yi family, the slaves who followed the outstanding descendants had a much better life. At least, they did not have to worry about starvation. On the other hand, the slaves who followed the marginalized people did not have a good life. When they were in trouble, they would even be sold in exchange for money. Qing Fu followed EC. Although he did not have a good life in the Yi family, EC knew how to run a business, so he did not starve to death. Even so, Grasshopper was much thinner than the other half-beast slaves. But now, Yizong compared Qing Fu's appearance to the one in front of him. His gaze was like a searchlight. When Qing Fu began to tremble, Yizong said faintly, You've become much stronger. Although he did not want to admit it, the reality in front of him told Yizong that EC and his servant's life in Yanjiao was much better than when they were in the Yi family. Even the 2 half-orc slaves he had brought with him were far inferior to Qing Fu. When Qing Fu came in with EC, the other slaves locked in the other cells were surprised. This kid had actually gained weight after betraying the Yi family with EC. In response, EC smiled faintly. Life is good. It was ironic that a member of the Yi family had a better life in a foreign tribe than in his own tribe. Ignoring Yizong's rueful expression, EC asked, Why are you here? The Gongjia family was looking for star butterfly worm blood to make weapons. Unfortunately, in the end, Yanjiao's Xiao Xian got his hands on it. Yizong explained the purpose of their trip. You've already fought Yi. Although Yi was curious about the star butterfly worm blood, he was more interested in Yi Zong's mention of the Yi family's fight with Yi. Looking at Yi Zong's fate and the dead Yi Qi, it was not hard to guess the outcome of this battle. "I'm afraid the Yi family will not be peaceful for a long time," said Yi. "Indeed. This time, if it wasn't for Yinjiao Xian, none of the 100 of us would have made it out alive." What? What does this have to do with Xian? Yi was surprised. The Yi family had mobilized 100 people to fight Yi Xiong on a battlefield like that. Yi could not perform divination, nor could he enter that realm. However, he knew that, logically speaking, outsiders should not be able to interfere in the Yi family's battles. And yet, Yi Zong said that Xian had indirectly saved them? That was unbelievable. How? How is that possible? Yi could predict many things, but what Yi Zong said was completely unexpected. He did not even think about it. Why not? Even the oracle left behind by our ancestors cracked. Yi Zong recounted how Xian broke the boundary. The oracle left behind by our ancestors. Yi's mouth fell open, his expression saying, "Are you *King kidding me?" Yi knew how powerful the tortoise shell was. Yet, such a powerful tortoise shell had been shattered by brute force. Yi Xiong and Yinjiao Xian were both beyond his imagination. He knew that Xian was powerful, but he had never placed Xian on the same level as Yi Xiong. Yi Zong leaned against the wall, his expression sorrowful and melancholic. Yi even saw a hint of relief in Yi Zong's eyes. Yi was observant and very observant. That was why he could tell that Yi Zong's expression was not right. This made him even more confused. After a moment of silence, Yi Zong finally said, "The founder shaman seal." His voice was not loud, as if he was mumbling to himself. However, in this cave, the other slaves did not dare to breathe loudly. The surroundings were silent. Even Yi, with his poor hearing, could hear Yi Zong's words clearly. These words caused Yi's face to turn pale and his heart to tremble in shock. "The founder shaman seal? It's really the founder shaman seal? Are you sure?" Yi felt as if there was a knife stuck in his throat. It was difficult for him to make a sound, and every word was trembling. Those who could be called ancestors could be traced back to a long, long time ago, when the human tribes were just formed. There was a group of people who were called ancestors. They were the ones who controlled the power of the fire seed. They were the ones who built the human tribes. It was also from them that humans began to break away from the bottom of the food chain. They multiplied and gradually developed to where they were today. There were countless versions of the legend of the ancestors. Every tribe claimed that they were the descendants of the ancestors. Otherwise, without the ancestors, where did the tribe's fire seed come from? However, in the Yi family's records, the real ancestors were not the first people who built the tribe, but the first people who controlled the fire seed. Many tribesmen believed that the people who built the tribe were the first to control the power of the fire seed. However, according to the Yi family's records, this was not the case. The ancestors came before them. The ancestors taught more people how to control the fire seed. Those who were taught later used the power of the fire seed to build the tribe. The ancestors might not even belong to any tribe. If the tribes were compared to the branches and leaves on a tree, then the ancestors would be the trunk, the only main trunk. The other branches would grow from the main trunk. In the Yi family's records, there was limited information that could be passed down. This was because the Yi family had many special ways of passing down information and preserved more of the history. In the limited records that were passed down, there was no mention of what the ancestors looked like, how many of them there were, or how they discovered and controlled the power of the fire seed. Among the preserved images, the most obvious one was the cross-shaped work pattern, which was also known by the Yi family as the Ancestor Witch Seal. Legend had it that the appearance of the Ancestor Witch Seal was accompanied by the appearance of witches. Therefore, the Ancestor Witch Seal was a representation of the Ancestor Witch. Everyone who knew about the Ancestor Witch Seal was in awe of that pattern. This was also why even Yi Xiong could not remain calm when he saw the Ancestor Witch Seal appear where Xian was. Just as Isi's heart was in turmoil, Izong asked again, "Do you think the ancestor which is still alive?" This alive did not necessarily mean alive in the eyes of the Yi family. Even if the body did not exist, it was not completely dead. The Yi family acknowledged the existence of souls. According to the ancestors of the Yi family, it was difficult to live without souls. Birds, beasts, mountains, rocks, water, wood, as well as souls. Everything had a soul, but some were so strong that even ordinary people could not ignore them, such as fire crystals. Some were so weak that even people with sharp senses could not detect them. The bone-reading beasts were created by the Yi family using the power of souls. Isi understood what Izong was referring to. The ancestor which was too mysterious, and because it had been too long, no one knew the truth. Then, even if the ancestor witch's body was destroyed, would her soul still exist? Isi could not answer. That was beyond his ability to predict. After a moment of hesitation, Isi asked, "Didn't you have a good talk with Xiao Xian?" "Good talk?" Izong smiled bitterly. If he had known, he would not have been in such dire straits. When he thought about how he had followed the royal city's army to hunt down the Yinjiao tribe, Izong felt like he had lost decades of his lifespan. Then, he thought about how Yituan had wanted to use Xiao Xian as bait to sacrifice Xiao Xian so that they could escape. In the end, Xiao Xian had smashed their oracle. Although the outcome had been beneficial to both sides, Izong felt helpless every time he thought about it. The enmity had existed for a long time, so if he wanted to resolve it and make the Yinjiao agree to spare his life, he would have to sacrifice more. Without waiting for Izong's reply, Isi asked again, "Is this why you were willing to come here as a captive?" Izong smiled, but did not speak. However, Isi had already guessed Izong's choice from his expression. If Xiao Xian had been an ordinary tribesman, Izong would have done the same. He would have dug a hole and buried himself. He would rather die than become a captive. At this moment, Izong suddenly looked in a direction, his eyes flashing. "The people I've been waiting for have arrived." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.